I'd like to bring this regular meeting of the Manitou Springs City Council to order. Mayor Graham is not with us tonight, and so I will be winging it for him. Let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Would the clerk please read the roll?
City Council members Judith Chandler.
Present.
Julie Wolfe.
Here.
Natalie Johnson.
Here.
Nancy Fortune.
Present.
Michelle Weatherholt.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem John Shada. And Mayor John Graham is absent, as noted.
I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved. Oh, second. Oh. Do we need a second? Do we have one? Right.
I think we do.
Okay.
All those in favor, please. Yeah. Oh, we're going to push the button this time.
My button isn't working.
Why don't we just do it by voice this time? All right. All right. Very good. Thank you. The next item is public comment on any non-agenda items. If you please come forward, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Please sit down at the table and turn the microphone on and announce yourself and your address. Is there anybody, Judy, who's signed up?
I have, it looks like everybody is for one of our agenda items. Let me just double check. Yeah, these are all specific to an agenda item.
Okay, very good. Is there anybody for a non-agenda item? All right, we'll go ahead and move forward then. The next item is our consent calendar. Would somebody like to make a motion to pass the consent calendar, or would anybody like anything removed?
I move that we approve the consent calendar.
I have one change I'd like to make.
Oh, please.
And that is on the minutes of March 1st, in paragraph G1, the dates for the Hiawatha Garden community engagement are for the 16th and the 30th of March, not the 17th.
Okay. Is the clerk clear on that clarification?
Okay, so that needs to be changed to the 16th and the 30th. Thank you.
Does the seconder agree with that? Or, yeah.
Approve the friendly amendment. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Are we ready to vote with the regular system, or should we do a voice vote with this one?
Just a second here. I'm in quite a few different programs.
Why don't we just do the votes?
No, well, actually, let me go ahead. I'm ready. Let me just go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Let me go ahead and
please vote.
Whoop, hang on. Okay, there you go.
Both of mine are...
Okay, it looks like... Okay, now we have them all. So it was unanimous in favor.
Thank you very much.
Mayor Pro Tem, may I make a comment? Just
yes,
a general
please.
Comment. I just want to give a shout out to Public Works. I was really impressed with the fact that in order to pay for the 58,000 plus asphalt trailer, that you were able to come up with more than that amount by auctioning off 3 pieces of equipment that we didn't need, and I just think that's awesome, and I just wanted to shout out to you and say thank you for being so fiscally conservative.
The next item is a presentation for the 150th celebration of the city's longevity, and I believe Alex is going to come forward. Alex, do you have any assistance here?
No, we can say by myself.
All right.
All right, good evening, everyone. Manitou Springs City Council, my name's Alex Treffry. I'm the Public Information Officer for the City of Manitou Springs. And I'll be giving a presentation on our 150-year celebration, which is this year. So the first thing to go over is why celebrate? So we're celebrating 150 years of city life and who we are. As quoted from The Springs of Manitou by Betty Marie Daniels, 1872 can be considered the year that the town of Manitou was born. But just as importantly, Manitou Springs' rich and diverse cultural heritage includes the original inhabitants and their ancestors, the Ute, Mountain Ute, and the Southern Ute from times immemorial. Quote, long before the gold rush settlement of Colorado City and before General Palmer arrived with his vision of Little London for Colorado Springs, the area of Colorado was home to the Ute, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Apache peoples. And that's from the One Nation Walking Together website. So for the city's involvement, some of the main points to note are the Day of Friendship, which we first celebrated last year for being named the third friendliest city in the United States. Part of that will be a community potluck, which the Manitou Springs Community Foundation has very graciously offered to donate funding to support, as well as a ice cream social. We're in the plans of making a vintage softball game between the fire department and the police department. They used to play each other in sporting events a few years back, so we'll be bringing that back. Also placing a historic plaque for our 150th as a memorial plaque. For funding for the 150-year celebration, still the previous slide. For the funding, we have $20,000 in funding in the city budget that was approved. And we also have other funding mechanisms. As I alluded to previously, the Community Foundation is being gracious enough to support us for the potluck. And as I'll touch on in a few slides, we plan on having T-shirts that will essentially pay for themselves. Next slide, please. So as similar for the Manitou Springs School District, 2022 marks their sesquicentennial celebration as well, 150 years since their founding, and also very well timed. It's 100 years since the Manitou Springs Elementary School opened its doors. So what 150 years celebration for the school district is they'll start with a kickoff at the start of the school year, a community and alumni celebration during homecoming week, a time capsule, a spotlight of the alumni impact stories, 150 years community service day, planting trees, working with Manitou Springs Education Foundation, and much more, which we'll touch on. So for the elementary school celebration of 100 years, they have a kickoff at the start of the year, an essay contest, 100 days and 100 years, like comparatively, an alumni day for the elementary school, time capsule opening, which is pretty awesome, also planting a tree and other celebrations that coincide with what I mentioned earlier. And as I mentioned with the T-shirts, they very graciously offered to partner with us to host a T-shirt design competition where we can pick the design that we think fits best and then sell those to pay for the cost of them. And it's a great way to, get the word out and have that merchandise to support this. Also have students tour the Heritage Center and the Mineral Springs, invite a historian to speak to students, and the Heritage Center will be using their auditorium for some performances. We'll hit on what the Heritage Center is doing soon. And also just any way that they can support us, which we graciously appreciate our partnership with the school district. For the Chamber of Commerce, as you saw on that beginning slide, they created the 150th logo for us. It looks great. Also, they'll be coinciding the 150th celebration with some of their already existing events, so the summer concert series in the Bud Ford Pavilion. They'll have a banner to hang there during the shows, as well as some other things, as well as the ice cream social and the pie banking competition with Little London Winds live music there, which is also on our Day of Friendship celebration. And then also just the inclusion of this, excuse me, this 150th celebration logo on any marketing events and promotion, and also using their platform, which is much larger than ours, to let everybody know about this. For the Creative Alliance, they will be doing free guided public art tours of the city's public art during October. And that's where they'll debut the Experience Manitou Springs walking tour app. In addition, there will be bike tours, which will be a bike ride tour of a selection of city arts, culture, and heritage points of interest in Manitou Springs. Now, on to my personal favorite. The Heritage Center will be providing an exhibit about the 3 times Manitou Springs hosted a peanut pusher, which was featured on the Travel Channel's Mysteries of the Museum. For those that don't know, it was somebody who used a contraption taped to their face to push a peanut up Pikes Peak. As I said, my personal favorite. And they will also have a 150th exhibit at the Heritage Center with 4 key themes: being a health resort, attractions, community builders, and a road to revival. And then in the City Hall display case, there will also be a mini exhibit. And to backtrack real quick, I will point out that that picture is a peanut that was pushed up Pikes Peak. They do have it. In addition, for the Heritage Center, there'll be a spa building event where they'll have a guest speaker, Doris McCraw, who will deliver a program about early women physicians and create a spa building exhibit that will be permanent in the building's lobby. And that's on June 11th. There will also be a historical summer theater that explores the many wondrous tales of Manitou Springs. And as just a teaser for it, it is, quote, a local history report is due tomorrow. So a local Manitou family employs the help of a magical history book and travel back to when Manitou as we know it began. 150th annual celebration is chock full of fun and surprises and laughs for all ages. And for the Manitou Pollinators Intertribal Council, for October, we have Indigenous Peoples Day, which is Monday, October 10th, for the kickoff celebration, which will feature local modern-day Indigenous peoples from the Manitou Pollinator Intertribal Council, as well as their respective tribal nations, families, etc. It'll feature pictures, heirlooms, artwork, specific tribal stories, Indigenous foods, pollinators, plants, seeds, etc. to be displayed. And those will also be displayed in the City Hall display case I mentioned earlier. For November, which is Native American Month, there'll be some events and some great speakers. There will be Debbie Day, who's a Manitou Lakota, granddaughter of Chief High Hawk and Chief Spotted Elk, both of whom were at Wounded Knee, who will share and pass on traditional oral stories of her life, as well as Wesley Black Elk, son of Wallace Black Elk, grandson of Black Elk, Oglala Sioux Nation, to share and pass on traditional oral stories of his life and the sacred work on behalf of our environment. And then there's Wileen Becker, Minikuju Lakota, who has a phenomenal resume, who will who currently works to educate and empower Indigenous women, girls, and communities, and will be offering a self-defense class and promote 911 bracelets, which is great work. On the next slide, we go a little bit more into what we're doing in November. You'll hear from Jim Standing Bear Wheatley, who's a Quahati Comanche Choctaw who works with Native American youth to heal scars and work together. As well as you'll hear from future generations. So you'll hear from living day modern Native American children who are from the Manitou Springs School District and the Bigfoot Riders, as well as some Indigenous food will be provided during certain speaking events and the community potluck. And all of this will also be featured in the City Hall display case. And with all of that information, let me know if you have any questions for me or anyone representing any of these groups.
Thank you, Alex. We'll move along to the proclamation for National Library Week, April 3rd through the 9th, and Natalie Johnson will be giving that presentation.
All right. Before I read the proclamation, I would like to recognize John Spears. He is our CEO and Chief Librarian for PPLD, and he'll be leaving us next month. And so I just want to thank him for taking care of Manitou Springs these last few years. He is not only all of these things, he's also my friend and neighbor, and so it will be a big loss. And Taryn, can you just raise your hand and wave? She's the new manager, or not newish manager, of the Manitou Springs Library, and if you haven't stopped by to say hello, I encourage you to do that. City of Manitou Springs Proclamation number 0122, proclamation recognizing National Library Week, April 3rd through 9th, 2022. Whereas public libraries are for everyone, libraries are accessible and inclusive places that build community and foster a sense of connection. And whereas the importance of libraries extends far beyond lending books and media, they are the font of ideas and chroniclers of the human experience. And whereas a library lives to share knowledge and ideas, to stimulate and satisfy curiosity, to do so broadly and expansively without the fear of censorship. It provides the satisfaction of learning and the joy of entertainment. And whereas libraries are essential components in the foundation of freedom, they are fundamental to the fabric of all informed and educated electorate. And they are the marketplace of ideas and must be guarded from prejudice. And whereas a library is home to the thoughts and experiences of multitudes of people unbounded by time or place, the library gives us the chance to hear their stories, consider their situations, and learn from their experiences. And whereas every library serves its community, but a thriving library is also served by its community. It is strengthened and vitalized by the commitment of its users. And whereas the Manitou Springs Carnegie Library has been a centerpiece for generations of residents and a welcoming place for everyone, we especially acknowledge its importance to our citizens. Now therefore it be resolved that the City of Manitou Springs proclaims National Library Week, April 3rd through 9th, 2022. During this week, we encourage all residents to connect with Pikes Peak Library District by visiting online or in person to access resources and services. Adopted this 15th of March, 2022 in the City of Manitou Springs, El Paso County, Colorado.
Thank you, Natalie, and so be that. Our next item is item number H1, which is our hearings. And I was wondering if, Mr. Parker, you could kind of outline what we need to do here in this first thing.
Yeah, on here. Well, this is a public hearing. So basically what you typically do is take a staff report first. After opening the public hearing, staff report's part of the public hearing. Then you generally take a presentation or any comments the applicant has to make, and then the public has an opportunity to provide comments as well in the public hearing. Once you've received all comments, you usually give staff and the applicant a chance to respond again, close the public hearing, and then the City Council can debate the application, and ultimately it'll result in a motion or a lack of a motion one way or another.
Thank you, Mr. Parker.
You're welcome.
I'll open the public hearing for the consideration of the Historic Preservation Commission recommendations on HD 2101, the Historic District Modification of the Keithley Log Cabin Subdistrict, 183 Crystal Park Road. And I'll just go ahead and have the staff, could you announce yourself and give your report? Thank you.
Good evening, councilors. I'm Dylan Becker, Planner 2. All right, so the hearing tonight is regarding the historic district modification to the Keithley Log Cabin Subdistrict at 183 Crystal Park Road, formerly known as the McLaughlin property. A little bit of history on this request. It initially went to a preliminary hearing with the Historic Preservation Commission on July 7th of last year. The commission heard the preliminary report by staff, heard public comment, and deliberated what documents and materials were desired for the public hearing. The commission made a motion to set an additional preliminary hearing for August 4th of 2021. Following a third-party evaluation by a historic preservation specialist regarding the proposed modification. At the August 4th Historic Preservation Commission meeting, the commission again heard the preliminary report by staff and a new report from History Colorado regarding the proposed changes. The commissioners heard public comment and deliberated what documents and materials were desired for the public hearing. The commission determined it still desired a third-party evaluation other than History Colorado to perform an evaluation on the request and the proposed modification. They initially made a motion to set the public hearing for October 6th of last year. The item was postponed several times, basically to allow time to get that evaluation done. And that evaluation has been included in your packet tonight from Felsberg, Holt, and Ulleveg. So the public hearing actually occurred on February 2nd, and the Historic Preservation Commission forwarded a recommendation to council. Next slide, please. So this is the HPC recommendation, and I'll just read it, because it looks a little hard to read up there. Commissioner Edmondson made a motion to approve HD 2101 with staff recommendations, which are findings. 1, the area to be removed lacks properties that reflect significant patterns of settlement and growth associated with the McLaughlin Lodge or the Keithley Log Cabin Subdistrict. 2, the area to be removed does not convey a sense of historic architectural cohesiveness. 3, the area to be removed does not contain properties that have historic significance or retain a high degree of integrity. 4, the area to be removed does not contain properties that embody distinctive characteristics of a style, type, period, or method of construction, or are a valuable example of the use of indigenous materials or craftsmanship. 5, the area to be removed does not contain properties that represent the works of notable builders, designers, or architects. 6, that the area to remain in the local historic preservation district does meet the criteria for designation. The motion was seconded. However, the commission came to a stalemate in terms of forwarding that recommendation for approval. So it was neither a recommendation for approval nor denial. They placed it in your hands. Next slide, please. So what the applicant is proposing is a modification to the Keithley Log Cabin Subdistrict boundary to better serve a rehabilitation and restoration of the existing structures on the property and redevelopment of a portion of the property located primarily to the east of Sutherland Creek. The entire property encompasses approximately 9.6 1.04 acres of land within the Keithley Log Cabin Subdistrict. And the initially proposed modification would reduce the area of the subdistrict to 3.29 acres on the site. The existing property contains 19 log cabins built between 1925 and 1953, and 7 additional buildings constructed between 1967 and 1975. The applicant proposes removal of 4 of the existing buildings east of Sutherland Creek and a restoration for the remaining structures on site. So what you have in the images here are, on the left you have the existing historic district boundary and the proposed reduction of that boundary on the Crystal Park property. And on the right, you have what that looks like in terms of the entire district and what that reduction would look like. So this was the initial proposal provided by the applicant that shows the structures and the proposed boundary modification. The buildings that have the X's on them are the buildings proposed for removal. So the request was evaluated based on the designation criteria and the historic preservation regulations. And what those state are: for designation as a local historic district through the City of Manitou Springs, a historic district or group of resources may be designated if: 1, the majority of the properties reflect significant geographical patterns, including those associated with different eras of settlement and growth, particular transportation modes, or distinctive examples of park or community planning. The majority of the properties convey a sense of historic or architectural cohesiveness through their design, setting, materials, workmanship, or association. The majority of the properties have historic significance and retain a high degree of integrity. The area in general is associated with a historically significant period in the development of the community or is associated with special historic events. The majority of the properties embody distinctive characteristics of a style, type, period, method of construction, or are a valuable example of the use of indigenous materials or craftsmanship. And lastly, the majority of the properties represent the works of notable builders, designers, or architects. And that was the criteria that this request was evaluated against. The third party that was contracted to perform an evaluation was Felsberg, Holt, and Ulevig. Their representative is attending via Zoom tonight, so if you do have questions about their report and assessment, you are able to ask them. A brief overview of that report. It stated, the removal of the eastern portion of the property from the Keithley Log Cabin Subdistrict as requested does not diminish the significance of the McLaughlin Lodge property. Preservation of the natural vegetation is encouraged, especially along Sutherland Creek, and recommend the proposed district boundary be offset to the east of where it was initially proposed, and east of the creek channel with a large enough buffer to ensure the preservation of the existing trees and natural vegetation along Sutherland Creek. They also recommended maintenance of existing gamble oak around the perimeter of the site in addition to the trees along Sutherland Creek. And they recommend that the city and HPC regulate the rehabilitation of the existing log cabins and main lodge building that will be retained in the log cabin subdistrict. All improvements to buildings within the proposed log cabin district should follow the City of Manitou Springs Historic Design Guidelines, which is available through the Planning Department, including, and specifically Chapter 4, Preservation, Alterations, and Additions to Contributing Residential Structures, and Chapter 8, Guidelines for New Construction and Additions in the Log Cabin Subdistrict. So the applicant prior to the HPC public hearing, did receive that report and comments, and they slightly modified their proposal to conform more with the recommendations made by Felsberg, Holt, and Ulevig. So the applicant concurred with staff recommendations along with the preservation consultant's recommendations. And finding that the proposed change does meet the criteria for establishment of a historic district per 1704-040 of the regulations. So in this image here, you have the applicant's response to the Felsberg, Holt, and Ulevig report, and they have agreed to modify the boundary per the recommendations made to include Sutherland Creek and the trees located in that area. So on the right, you have the modified historic district boundary as proposed. So staff's recommendations, staff recommends the City Council approve the change to the local historic district boundaries, the Keithley Log Cabin Subdistrict, in the area of the McLaughlin Lodge property at 183 Crystal Park Road, finding that the proposed or as approved change meets the criteria for establishment of a historic district per section 1704-040 of the Historic Preservation Regulations with the following findings. 1, the area to be removed lacks properties that reflect significant patterns of settlement and growth associated with the McLaughlin Lodge or the Keithley Log Cabin Subdistrict. 2, the area to be removed does not convey a sense of historic or architectural cohesiveness. 3, the area to be removed does not contain properties that have historic significance or retain a high degree of integrity. 4, the area to be removed does not contain properties that embody distinctive characteristics of a style, type, period, or method of construction, or are a valuable example of the use of indigenous materials or craftsmanship. The area to be removed does not contain properties that represent the works of notable builders, designers, or architects. And lastly, that the area to remain in the local historic preservation district does meet the requirements for inclusion in the district. And that concludes the staff report. I am available for questions as well as the Felsberg, Holt, and Ulevig consultant.
Thank you. Council, any questions? Stand by. Mr. Parker, who's next?
The applicant has an opportunity to present if they want to.
Thank you. Would the applicant like to come forward? Please state your name and address for the record and speak clearly into the microphone so everybody can hear you. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Bill Gooman with William Gooman and Associates, 731 North Weber Street, Colorado Springs, and we are the applicant and the planner for this application. And I do have a PowerPoint presentation. I will go through it quicker since Dylan did include some of the items in his presentation that also appear in our presentation, but I do have printed copies also that I'd like to hand out to you so you can take notes if you choose. Again, this is a request to modify the historic district revision to the Keithley Log Cabin Subdistrict at 183 Crystal Park Road. Our project team is represented by me, Bill Gooman. Ed Morgan is a planner in our office who has worked extensively on the planning of the log cabin district. Ed is here as well. The owner and developer for Manitou Cabins, we have this evening Taylor Stamp and Nancy and Marty Johnson. I would like to introduce the owners. If you could stand and I would like for the three of these to take a minute apiece to just introduce themselves, let you know where they're from and what they're about. There seems to have been a little bit of misinformation within the public as to who the owners and the developers of the property are.
If each one of you would come forward and do your conversation with us in front of the microphone, we'd appreciate that for the record.
Yeah, I'm Marty Johnson. We're local residents at 211. Sit down.
You sit down, then your voice will be closer to the mic, and then everyone on Zoom can hear you.
Okay.
Or YouTube.
Again, I'm Marty Johnson. We live, and my wife Nancy, we live at 211 Crystal Valley Road. We've been residents in Manitou for 15 years now. Originally, we were moved to Colorado Springs in 1985, so we've been active residents in the area. We were so excited to be able to buy this project and restore and develop the project and add a few new homes that help us support the project. Taylor, you want to come up? So we're partners with the Stamp family, and Taylor's one of the developers.
Hello, Taylor Stamp. I'm actually a resident of Colorado Springs, 1431 West Gutierrez, Colorado Springs, so old Colorado City. Born and raised in Colorado Springs. Hopefully this kind of helps put faces to who the developers are, because I know there has been some concern of who's doing this project. We're not California developers with tons of money that are coming in to try to change things in Manitou. We're actually very excited about this project to preserve what's existing and maybe provide some homes for someone like myself, who I have a 1-year-old daughter at home, and we need to expand on housing. So this kind of project opens up opportunities for younger families with the housing market so difficult right now. So yeah, we're really excited about this project, and really, yeah, that's all I have to say. Nancy, I'll let you follow up.
Hello, I'm Nancy Johnson. My husband Marty said, basically, we have deep roots in the community. We've been on the west side and in Manitou for close to 40 years. I used to be a member of Commonweal Artists for years. We raised our kids here. We're not big, scary developers. We're basically two families that are putting a significant amount of money and time and effort to create something special that will hopefully be valued in Manitou for generations to come. And we've put a lot of effort into trying to really restore and improve this project so that, the whole surrounding community will get benefit from it for years to come. So that's.
Thanks, Taylor, Marty, and Nancy. Not your typical developers by any means. but we thought, as Taylor indicated, it would be important and beneficial for us to associate faces with the project itself. You can tell there are ties to the community here. I know Taylor has identified and earmarked one of the properties on the Manitou Cabin District as a potential future home for him and his family. So that just, I think demonstrates how they intend to maintain the ties to the community here as well. We don't have very many clients, developer clients, who actually buy a home in the neighborhood that they develop. This is a unique opportunity, but I think it speaks quite a bit about the faith that we all have in maintaining the historic character of the property and preserving something that the entire community can point to down the road and say, remember when? And yeah, they refurbished it and renovated it, and 100 years from now it still might be there. The next slide that you see is a letter of notification that we're required by ordinance to mail. Dylan indicated and provided us with a list of 164 neighboring properties within a 300-foot radius of the Manitou Cabin site. I can verify that everyone whose name appeared on the list that we were provided was mailed a letter of notification of this evening's public hearing. We bring this up because there has been some misinformation too regarding that some of our deliberations on this have been held behind closed doors. That is not true, and that there wasn't enough time to regroup and gather to attend public hearings of the Historic Preservation Commission. A letter similar to this had also gone out before the first Historic Preservation Commission meeting, so we have satisfied the public notification as intended. The proposed site plan is there. This is something that you had seen in Dylan's presentation, so I won't spend a lot of time on that. The proposed historic boundary modification, the slide that you see indicates the entire Keithley subdistrict, the Manitou Cabins historic subdistrict rather. The red line is the entire area that encompasses the district. The red hatch to the lower southeast is representative of what we're asking council to consider to modify and remove from the historic district. And there's a lighter hatch just north of the red hatch. That is the actual log cabin, the Manitou log cabin district that will remain preserved, and that is the portion of the site that'll be will remain under the jurisdiction of the historic cabin design guidelines. The existing structures are represented in green. All the log cabins that you see will be preserved and in some form rehabilitated and restored in accordance with the Historic District Design Guidelines. There are actually 21 existing cabins that are depicted there that will remain on the west side of Sutherland Creek. If you've been by the property recently, you'll notice that there has been some construction activity. Basically, it's a stopgap measure that's been occurring for the last 6 or 7 months. Roof repairs, dead branches and trees removed, new sewer and water lines being installed, roof repairs. If you've been in any of these cabins after having endured a fairly lengthy period of neglect and just abandonment, there was an urgent need to provide remedial repairs to some of the structures so that they didn't totally deteriorate and collapse into the ground. So our client, the owners of the property, have been making a concerted effort in good faith that they will at some point, with the city's blessing, be able to move forward and rehabilitate these cabins as intended. I will mention that there is one cabin. It's the smallest one, and I don't have a laser pointer here or anything, but if you look to the northeastern portion, there's a really small cabin up there off the new road. Now make a right. Keep going right there. 1925 cabin. The historic preservation consultant indicated that it's in really, really rough shape, probably not worthy of rehabilitation. We think a little differently, and we're proposing to repurpose that cabin. It's 10 by 8. It's a very small structure, but it is a log-sided cabin on a crumbling concrete foundation. And we're proposing to relocate that cabin elsewhere within the historic district site and use it as a mail kiosk for the entire property. There are also 3 non-historic structures that Dylan referred to. You can see them on your handout as having an X designated through them. One of them is right at the entrance off of Sutherland Road onto our new street. These are the only cabins that are being removed, and I don't even like to call them cabins. They're structures. They're non-historic. They were constructed in the 70s, but they are being removed. Dylan had gone over the HD 2101 information that was in your package. I would like to, and there is a drawing there someplace, there it is, call out a few things. Dylan did indicate that staff had made recommendations that we did in fact satisfy, that staff agreed we did in fact satisfy the intent of modifying the historic district boundaries to accommodate newer development on the east side of Sutherland Creek. The historic consultant also made findings and a recommendation that the remainder of the project that would stay, the green portion that you see in the slide would stay within the log cabin historic district, did satisfy the intent of the historic district guidelines. I would like to reiterate and mention something here that was briefly touched upon. It was at the direction of the Historic Preservation Commission that an outside expert in your package, the historic consultant's report is identified as a third-party consultant. That was a specific request of the Historic Preservation Commission, and the city obliged the commission by hiring the outside consultant. I bring this up because there were 5 separate times where a hearing was scheduled by the Historic Preservation Commission to allow a third-party specialist to evaluate and make a recommendation. The third-party specialist that was hired by the Preservation Commission actually delayed this project for a period approaching 6 months. Had the Historic Preservation Commission not requested for an expert, an outside historian, to come in and evaluate the current situation of the property, this might have been resolved. The public hearing that we're having tonight might have been resolved quite a few months ago. The other item that I would like to point out to you, the proposed historic district modification, with the exception of that small cabin that I had pointed out earlier, does not require the removal of any of the historic log cabins in the district. We were asked by the Historic Preservation Commission, well, you guys knew that this was a property that was within the boundaries of the historic district, so why are you here asking for a modification of the boundary? And we went to the Historic District Design Guidelines to come up with an answer that we'll share with you. The items that we're mentioning here in the next couple of slides were taken verbatim from the city's Historic District Guidelines. We, for the sake of conserving some time here, identified just a few of the ideas or a few of the reasons why we think that modifying this site makes sense. And the next slide in red, very basic, but to show that we have indeed considered the historic design guidelines and why we think it's appropriate, and concur with staff and the historian to remove a portion of the property from the district, are that the design guidelines as written, they're pretty specific, and they were intended for log cabins that I don't think include modern day log cabins. The examples that we're providing here as to why modifying the district makes sense is that in the guidelines on the left side, you're seeing a step-up type structure, which will be fairly typical of about 4 or 5 of the 9 total homes, and I need to get that on the record. There are 9 proposed new homes that would be developed east of Sutherland Creek, but 4, possibly 5 of them have a pretty steep slope. If you visited the site, there's a buildable area down below that will accommodate a new private street going in, but our desire and our intent is to avoid encroaching into that slope for fear of causing any geological disturbance of the landform and the existing homes that are in the Indian Oak subdivision above. I know that there were some concerns from residents above, well, how far back into the slope do you plan to develop? The reason why this is important is the first bullet point says the Manitou cabin site works best with tuck-under garages with direct access to the proposed street at the front of the property. If we had rear rear access garages or side access garages. We are assuming most new home buyers in this particular portion of the district are going to want garages. Our engineers have looked at this and advised that if you want to minimize the impact of the slope that is on the eastern perimeter of our property, you're going to have to move the garages to the front side of these dwellings and not put them as ancillary or auxiliary structures on the back of the property. We've requested a variance to allow for a decreased front yard setback on lots that have significant topography rear of the building. Again, that's kind of a result of what I've just explained about where we would intend to put garages. Constructing garages as separate structures, access from the side or rear would require extensive grading and excavation and further encroachment into existing slopes. Next slide. This has to do with the building materials section of the Historic District Design Guidelines, in which whole logs and split log veneers are the predominant building materials that are required for new residential construction within the log cabin sub-district, the historic sub-district. Some of the things that the owners have considered in light of headlines that we've seen in Colorado within the last 4 to 5 months alone. The areas to be removed from the sub-district, which includes 7 residential dwellings that do not address or satisfy historic district guidelines, they're not historically significant. And I've got some photos here in a second to show you why. Many Colorado municipalities, including the towns of Superior and Louisville, after the Marshall Fire of 2021, have amended their building code to discourage and in some cases prohibit the use of non-fire retardant materials for new dwellings. Log construction and veneer elevations are not fire retardant. They're beautiful, but we question the applicability and the practicality of that on this particular site, especially in a fire-prone hillside area. New homes constructed of whole or split log veneers at the bottom of an existing steep slope would create a chimney effect if they were to burn, further endangering existing homes in the Indian Hills neighborhood located above the slope. And a reason why this is being brought to your attention is both staff and the historic preservation consultant have indicated as part of their recommendations that existing vegetation be preserved to the extent as possible. Existing stands of Gamble Oak located on new lots, and it's substantial. There's not just a few clusters. There's a fair amount of Gamble Oak on the tops of the slopes that will be preserved as suggested by the city, could contribute significantly to fire concerns. New homes constructed with whole logs and split log veneers then become a public safety concern. What you are seeing here are examples of existing homes located within the historic cabin district that are actually non-compliant with historic design guidelines. One of the recommendations of staff along with the city's historic preservation consultant, indicated the area to be removed from the sub-district, the historic district, does not contain properties that embody distinctive characteristics of a style, type, period, or method of construction, or are valuable examples of the use of indigenous materials or craftsmanship. The next slide also indicates the additional structures that were constructed in 1967 and 75. The area to be removed does not contain properties that represent the works of notable builders, designers, or architects. I can assure you that there are no records that we were able to find that indicated any of the structures that you've seen here are the work of craftsmen or notable architects, builders, or designers, yet they are located within the historic district. They would be located in the portion of the district that we're requesting consideration to be removed from the overall historic district, but these are being provided to you as an example to show that we've got 7 structures, and these are scheduled to remain. These will not be bulldozed down or razed. These will be rehabilitated so that they are marketable and inhabitable. But these are not log cabin structures, and they're located in the portion of the district that we're requesting be removed. The request that Dylan presented to you earlier, although 6 criteria were included in the motion to allow the historic boundary to be modified after the 5 delays in nearly 6 months to retain a historic consultant at the request of the Historic Preservation Committee. You have the minutes of the final hearing that wound up with no victor and no loser in a split vote, 3-3. There was, interestingly, after a fairly lengthy presentation at the 5th public hearing, no discussion regarding the historic consultant's recommendation or staff's recommendation. They were both read into the record, and the motion made by the chair of the Historic Preservation Commission included the 6 criteria of the consultant and of staff. One commissioner, the commissioner who seconded the chair's motion, indicated she would support the motion, and she did, but she also qualified her second by saying even though she personally did not favor removal from the district, she was going to support the motion to remove the portion from the district because the applicant had done everything the city and the Historic Preservation Commission had asked of us to do without qualification. So I bring that up because it wasn't necessarily a slam dunk. We were sitting there on the edge of our chairs waiting, okay, we have a board here or a commission that's really not showing its hand. What's the outcome of this going to be? There was extensive rationale provided by staff and the district's or the commission's consultant, but there was no rebuttal for any of the criteria, any of the recommendations. And the motion, as is required, failed on a 3-3 split vote. So we are asking you to challenge your Historic Preservation Commission's decision based on the recommendations and findings of the historic or the historian that was retained who advised the commission and staff, and also to support the recommendations of staff. One dissenting commissioner at the end of the meeting, when she cast her vote, simply stated that she was going to vote against the motion to modify the district because she just didn't like it. That was the extent of the rationale given. And we thought that was interesting, somewhat unfair, is after nearly 6 months of delay and deliberations, it appears that 3 commissioners dismissed the recommendations of staff and the historian that had been retained simply because they didn't like their own expert's recommendation. Now, I understand their advisory capacity, just as council is totally within its purview to not accept the recommendation of an expert or a witness or any of its advisory boards, but we're asking you to please consider the criteria that has been presented to you this evening from staff and from the retained historian. And we're asking for the motion to approve the modification of the historic district, the revision of Keithley Log Subdistrict at 183 Crystal Park Road, with staff's recommendations, items 1 through 6, and I won't read these because Dylan already had. That concludes the presentation that I had planned to make this evening, and would be glad to try and answer any questions that council may have.
Questions, council?
Nancy. Less a question than a clarification. Could we go back to slide 5, please? I don't know who's controlling the slides. Yeah. I just wanted to clarify that on this slide it shows the entire district, generally known as the cabin district. I know it's a little confusing because your proposal is just for your property.
Correct.
So I just wanted to make it real clear that this is part of a much larger district.
Correct.
Thank you.
The red hatched area specifically is the portion that we are requesting be removed from the district. Also, if I may add to that, what you're seeing there includes the additional area that staff and the historian requested be added to the east side of Sutherland Creek to preserve additional vegetation. So it may appear that that's a significant amount of area. Actually, it's smaller than where we began 7 or 8 months ago.
Any other questions, council? Thank you, sir.
Thank you for your time.
Mr. Parker? The
So,
next step?
Yeah, the next step is for public comment.
As the city attorney said, our next thing is going to be public comment. I believe the clerk has, I think we'll start with her list, and she will call your name up. If you come up and sit down, speak clearly into the microphone so that for the record and for people on YouTube to view the proceedings, state your name and address. And please keep your presentation, fairly short, 3 minutes or so. Thank you. Judy.
Matt Ferguson.
My name is Matt Ferguson. I live at 1370 Indian Oaks Place. I had a pretty lengthy speech prepared, and given the amount of time that the applicant has taken up, I just wanted to call attention to an email that a neighbor sent to the council prior to this meeting. His name is John Maynard, and he spent his entire career in land use, and he lives in Indian Oaks Place as well. And in that email, he cited a question from one of the Historic Preservation Commission members to the applicant, and she simply asked, "Can you do your work without removing this property from the historic district?" Mr. Gooman responded that he could do so. In so stating, Mr. Gooman admits that there is no justification for his request. That's the heart of the matter here. That was quite a long presentation, but he doesn't need this removed from the historic district in order to do his job, in order for them to develop this property. That individual just so happens to have probably said the most eloquent thing during the Historic Preservation Commission's hearing on the matter, and her conclusion was that there was so little of this historic district left. I think the way she said it was, once it's gone, it's gone. And you need to give us a good reason to approve this request. That just so happens to be the individual that he so disparagingly referenced at the end of his presentation. So with that, I'll kind of end my comments, and I just wanted to again urge the council to agree with the Historic Preservation Commission in denying this request. Thank you.
James Hemingway.
Thank you for letting me speak. My name is James Hemingway. I live at 230 Crystal Park Road here in Manitou. And I would just like to say that I really haven't heard a good reason for changing the designation of this district. I've been concerned since the beginning when I started to ask about it and was told that they're not changing the designation, they're only changing the boundary. That confused me. I mean, if you change the boundary and exclude part of it, the historic district is a unit. It contains trees, cabins, creek, open areas. When you split it into two halves, those two halves are not equal. So yeah, you can look at one half of it and say, well, this part of what was the historic district doesn't really qualify on its own. But as it stands now, it is a unit. And I really don't see much of a reason, or really any reason, to change it, because everything that needs to be done, or once the developers want to do, can be done without changing the designation of this district. I'd also like to bring up another point that concerns me, and that's the precedent that this would set. We have numerous historic districts around. I don't know how many exactly, but as soon as you start excluding sections or changing the designation on a historic district, what's the point in designating something as a historic district if at some point in the future a developer can come along and simply change it and build whatever they want? And what somebody proposes to build may not be what they build. So, you know, I'm really hoping that the council will help everybody out here. I haven't talked to anybody that seems to support this. We're not against the development. We're not against the developer. We just want to stay within the guidelines of the historic district. And that's the way it was set up. And I have yet to hear a good justification for changing it other than it makes things easier, which to me means maybe more profitable or less costly to implement. It doesn't do anything to benefit the city or the citizens or the people in the area. And I think that's all. So I hope the council will support us and keep the historic district intact. Thank you.
Randy Bobine?
However you pronounce
Randy, could you just pronounce your name correctly, please?
Beaubien.
Thank you. And your address?
240 Crystal Park Road in Manitou Springs. I just wanted to say that preservation of historic resources is very important to the citizens of Manitou Springs. The resources are not just buildings. The historic district system is a major, I wanted to also point out, it's interesting that historic is incorporated into our town logo very prominently. So I think that's the thing here. The historic district system is a major factor in maintaining the character of the neighborhoods that we live in. And I think ultimately the beauty of our town and the character of our town. I'm opposed to any reduction to the size or area of the current Keithley Cabin Historic District. And I think that we should maintain the ordinance governing this area as it is. Thank you.
Dave McDonald.
Hello, Council. I'm Dave McDonald. I live at 1385 Indian Oaks Place. So, years ago, the city put this property, the Cheyenne Village property, into a historic district. And now we're talking about undoing that so we can build a new subdivision behind the historic cabins that we've been preserving for decades. So I'm wondering why we'd want to do that. We'd ruin the aesthetic of the area, in my opinion, and it's a great vibe down there. It's something that the residents of Manitou and the tourists that come here can actually go to view the district. It's kind of the accessible part of it, if you know what I mean. And I just don't see what is in it for the Manitou residents to remove the designation. They bought the property with that designation. I assert that when that property is developed, they're not going to lose 1 penny on these lots, whether you have a brand new home or you have something that looks like a historic cabin there. And, you know, I was thinking when we put up the ordinance earlier, Mr. Guman's presentation of what makes a historic district, the first point, the last sentence of it said, distinctive examples of park or community planning. Well, this isn't a distinctive example when you think about it, because years ago, this community planned that this would be a historic district. And I think it meets the qualifications on that, if anything else. Because where else in this area do you have a property like this with these cabins? I can't think of anywhere in Colorado Springs where somebody had the forethought to put this aside. So I think the best thing for Manitou and the best thing for the people that come here is to keep it the way it is. Thank you for listening.
Mark Zappel.
Hi, my name is Mark Zappel, and I live at 1330 Indian Oaks Place. Dave McDonald is one of my neighbors. I agree with everything that all four of these speakers have just said, and we're all kind of barking up the same tree here. My property, I've lived on Indian Oaks Place for 36 years, and many of the homes on Indian Oaks Place border up against the property that's in question. I did spend some time, I reviewed the consultants' reports and the Manitou Springs staff reports, and one thing that struck me was one very big glaring omission, and this has been kind of pointed out by some of the speakers here, and that is, what is the effect going to be of a new subdivision with 9 new homes that's within 100 feet of these cabins? Because essentially that's what's going to happen if you bring this area out of the historic district. You're going to have these brand new homes. So picture, you know, these beautiful 100-year-old log cabins next to a stucco house, a Tudor house, and a concrete house, because there have been no covenants submitted by Mr. Guman or these builders. We don't know what kind of homes are going to go in there. And what's going to happen with an unrestricted development there is going to totally take away the essence of this historic district. There'll be no point in having it with this new subdivision directly adjacent to these beautiful cabins. So what I'm suggesting is that the historic district be maintained, and by maintaining it within the historic district, that means any development that happens within the district will have to abide by the historic district guidelines. As Mr. Guman pointed out, when this came up in front of historic, they did deny the petition, and it's my hope here today that City Council will also deny this petition to bring it out of the district. Thank you very much.
That was the last of those that were turned in advance.
Thank you. If anybody else would like to come forward, I realize you might not have signed in, but it's all right for you to just come up one by one. Same kind of rules apply. Please state your name and address for the record, and keep your comments, to the point and short as possible. Thank you. Does anybody else like to come forward? Okay, seeing none. Oh, I'm sorry. There's one coming up from the back there.
Hello, my name's Troy Juth. I live at 262 Crystal Valley Road, Manitou Springs. I don't quite understand this. If any of you have been by these cabins, they're falling down, they're decrepit, they're an eyesore. These people are trying to make improvements to preserve these cabins, and they've gone through all the steps that's been asked of them by Manitou, the historic district. So I don't see what the holdup is. Thank you. My name is Thomas English. I live at 162 Crystal Valley Road. I know that we're trying to keep balance here, right? So what happens, how you do that? These fine people here want to make sure it stay nice and whatever. And these people here, they live there in Manitou. They're not just builders from outside. So they're coming in with the same thought that these young people over here have, and they're trying to do something nice. So I think we should trust them and give them an opportunity to present their project, because they got the same love for Manitou that all of us have. Thank you.
I'm sorry, sir, I didn't hear your name.
Thomas English.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else, please?
All right, my name is Richard Bainbridge, 1375 Indian Oaks Place. I just find it interesting. We showed the criteria for establishing a district, and we talked about development. But the actual motion here is really what it takes to remove something from a historic district. It's already been established. The criterion has been met to put it in the district. So really, all you have to think about here is, was any reason given to remove something that isn't a district from the district? And it doesn't matter for what purpose. Was there any benefit to the community that would outweigh the existing status? So thank you.
Anybody else, please? Okay, seeing none. Mr. Parker, what's next?
Typically, we give the applicant a chance to respond, and if staff has any final comments as well.
For the record, just state your name so that the clerk knows who's speaking when they listen to this recording later.
Thank you. Bill Guman, representing the owner, William Guman and Associates, the applicant. one thing we need to reiterate, and I think there's a miscommunications here, is we're not taking down and destroying the district that is there. The cabins that we want to keep within the historic cabin district will remain. They're being preserved rather than bulldozed down. That would have been unconscionable for something of that historic significance and value. But I would like to just read one thing. Mr. Ferguson, who lives in Indian Oaks, and just to mention to council also that the Indian Oaks subdivision and the Crystal Hills subdivision were once a part of the historic district as well, and they've been removed over time. Mr. Edmondson, the chair of the Historic Preservation Committee, did a pretty good job of explaining this at the final public hearing. So that said, I think it's almost ironic here too that Mr. Ferguson indicated that it should be denied if we couldn't develop guidelines. First of all, I beg to differ. That's not something I said. If it is something I said, obviously it's a part of public record. But to support that I did not say this and that Mr. Maynard was not 100% in disagreement with this, I have a letter, and you have it in your package as well, from September 20th of 2021 from Mr. John Maynard, and I'll read a portion of it here. It says, if the board and council decide to remove the property from the district, removal should be preceded by the creation of new guidelines that can be reviewed by adjoining property owners. I would not object to removal from the district if this condition is met. Ideally, new design guidelines would be consistent with those of Indian Oaks subdivision, and covenants would be established to ensure enforcement of the design guidelines. That indicated that we don't have any design guidelines. That's not correct. It's not to be discussed at this public hearing, but when the development plan is presented for the renovation of the Manitou Cabins District, we were required by the city to prepare a homeowners association to ensure perpetual maintenance and upgrade of the cabin district. And we also submitted CCRs, protective covenants, for the entire development, including the new homes, the 9 new homes that are proposed. And we used the Indian Oaks subdivision covenants as a template to model those guidelines. So they're not entered into record here tonight, but it's wrong to say that there will be no oversight, that we're going to go in there, the owners are going to go in there and just build whatever they want. There are very restrictive covenants and guidelines to maintain and protect the integrity of what's to be built. The only last thing that I would like to mention is the removal from the district, the new portion east of the creek, will also allow funds that would be realized from the sale and development of new lots to be used to go toward refurbishing the cabins. they're a mess. If you've toured them, they're in sad shape. They're in an advanced state of neglect. The expense is huge, as you might imagine, especially nowadays with the lack of skilled craftsmen and builders. And the owners have identified a need for funding that far exceeds what any lender is going to provide them to refurbish these cabins. Removing part of the site from the district and removing the log cabin design guidelines will help the owner generate the funding that is necessary to rehab the part that we want to preserve. So I do appreciate the speakers who commented this evening. I mentioned that there were 164 letters that had gone out notifying the public of this evening's public hearing. I think 5 or 6 to show up and actually speak, it's a good number. It's better than nothing. But I see that you would like to say something.
So to reiterate, Taylor Stamp. There's a few comments that I want to hit on, much like Bill alluded on, is we're not asking for free reign on this project. The removal of historic boundary really, it allows us flexibility to do things on the site that the historic guidelines wouldn't let us, which if we stick to the historic guidelines, it's going to impact the site pretty dramatically. We're going to be going up on the hillside, encroaching on the neighbors on the Indian Hills. You're ruining vegetation. So we're not asking for free reign to put up these monster stucco new construction sites. We're really asking the flexibility to integrate new construction into the hillside, to go with the log cabins, to go with Indian Hills, which are 50 feet from where these properties will be. So to say that we're doing a new development that's impacting the cabins where Indian Hills did the same thing a number of years ago, it's no different. We're just trying to make sure that it really integrates from both Indian Hills and the log cabin district, that it's kind of seamless, that it keep the park-like vibe. And if you want to build a log cabin and stick with that, that would be great. But I think it's going to be very difficult for many builders to do so. The fire mitigation is huge. Colorado Springs does not allow you to use wood siding at this point to build for fire issues. So if we can figure out a different way to integrate both developments, that would be huge. My one point that was alluded to in Bill's slide was the structures built in the 70s that are within the boundary. I personally don't know what we would do with those. They're non-contributing. How do we rehab those? They need help. You can't put log siding and make them look like a log cabin. It's just not possible. So it's in a gray area of what do we do with those? They're the closest properties to the cabins. So when you consider what we're proposing for new construction, those are the ones most visible. So I don't know what we would do with those if they're stuck within the historic guidelines. There's no gray area for that. And I do want to thank everyone for coming out and basically voicing your opinion. I'm a big historic preservationist myself. I live in a 1925s Craftsman. I don't want to see historic properties fall to disarray, but I mean, and you guys showing your passion of historic properties is great. But unfortunately, land, I don't view this as historic, and I would really like to be able to integrate all sides. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
So I guess if staff has any closing remarks, if they don't, then we can just conclude the public hearing.
Nancy.
Thanks. I did want to clarify, a statement was made that Indian Oaks was in the historic and Crystal Hills was in the historic district. I suspect that is not the case. It was in the cabin, it was originally planned for the cabin district, but neither of those properties were ever in the historic district of Manitou Springs, as I understand it. Am I correct in my understanding?
That is correct. That subdivision was a part of the original property that was the McLaughlin property. But as far as them actually being in a log cabin district, they were not.
Okay, thank you.
Council, any other questions of staff?
Dylan, could you clarify too, like, how does the variance process work? Like, is this something where they could, if this were denied, they could apply for a variance to build the structures that are supported by that landscape, or?
So what the variances mentioned were for setback, relief from setback requirements. Basically, some of the configurations of the lots and the topography of the hillside, and them, wanting to preserve that hillside, pushes the development closer towards the edge of those lots, and that would be the reason for the variances.
Yes, so just to clarify, so they could apply for variances or apply for additional variances?
So the setback requirements are set in the zoning code. Without a proposed structure on those lots, it's hard to say whether one would be required or even needed, or how much that would be if one was needed.
I can also address that issue. Variances are generally only permitted for variances from the provisions of the zoning code, not the historic preservation code.
Council, any other questions? I have one for you. Could you depict for us, if the district is unchanged, what is the new development that would be allowed in that area?
It would have to conform to the historic design guidelines for that district, and each one would have to be approved by the Historic Preservation Commission and a material change of appearance certification.
I have another question for you. In that particular log cabin district, how many other structures that are new have gone through that process in recent years?
For a new construction in that district? There have been at least a couple in the last couple of years, and there are two more in that sub-district. One is a new construction, and one is a rehab of a roof that are going forward next month.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry.
So at this point, you can't yell out things from the crowd. It's not part of the public record. So
Apparently, Mr. Smith is saying there have been 5 new structures in the district. Is that correct? In the last 10 years. Thank you. Just to make sure that his name and the comment gets on the record. Was I accurate, Mr. Smith? Thank you.
Thank you, Dylan. So if this area was to remain in the historic district, what can't the developers do that they'd like to do? Would they not be allowed to have variances? So what would they not be able to do?
Well, like I said, if it remains in the district, whatever new construction is developed has to meet the design guidelines for that district and the historic preservation regulations. So it's a further constraint on what they're intending to do, I believe.
Would this change the number of lots that the developer is proposing to build on?
No, that has to do with zoning and the zoning code.
Thank you.
Council, any other questions? All right, Mr. Parker, where do we stand on this?
So at this point, you can close the public hearing, and then deliberate on the issue of whether or not it should be removed from the historic preservation district. And I'll just make a quick comment before we actually close the public hearing, just so we're clear on the standards that are being applied. Just want to jump back to my code. So the standards that apply for removal or amendment of an historic preservation district boundary are basically that you need to follow the same procedures for adding property, which you're doing by having a public hearing. And then if a decision to remove property from the district basically is if it no longer meets the designation criteria. So if it no longer meets any of the criteria for designating a property to be part of the historic preservation district, that's the basis for making a decision to remove it. It's generally not what's planned in the future. It's generally not proposals that are going to be made to build something moving forward. It's whether or not the property no longer meets the designation criteria for being in the historic preservation district itself. And those are the criteria that your planner had basically listed when he was explaining the criteria that apply.
Mr. Parker, I do have a question for you. Given the fact that the proposal, as I understand the developer, and I realize this is sort of a little bit, maybe out of the ballpark in terms of for this, but the developer is showing a series of lots, okay? And as I understand it, the district was formed without those lots in mind. Is that not correct?
Yeah, I don't know what was in mind, but the lots were not there when the district was basically established. That's
exactly.
Correct.
Okay. So I guess what I'm a little confused about is it sounds like to me there's some conflation here that basically these lots are going to be developed. And because of these lots, okay, all right, they cannot, they wish to develop on them, and they wish not them to be in the district, okay? So my problem with it is that if what you're saying is true, okay, which I'm not disputing that, but it sounds like to me we're on a little unequal ground here, okay? And in other words, the proposal is showing lots, okay? We don't have here before us a piece of property, okay, in which is not being taken as a whole piece. Do you see what my point is?
Yeah, I understand your point. I think that, and I'm not advocating for any particular approach. I just want to make sure you understand the criteria, first of all.
I understand that.
And ultimately, if you remove property from the historic preservation district, and I'm not saying they have plans to change anything, but the plans they're showing you now, they don't have to follow through with those. So that's my point. If you're making a decision based upon what you're seeing versus on, as proposed for the property later versus on the criteria in the code, you're making a decision on the wrong basis because they don't have to do that ultimately. They will no longer have to comply with the historic preservation guidelines, and that's the only real impact of the decision.
Okay. All right. So, and that's, I guess, what I wanted to be clear about. There were many representation here tonight about covenants, okay, purported developmental standards that maybe would happen in other processes, okay? And I guess I want to caution council that that stuff is stuff that we cannot make attached tonight.
Right.
Is that correct?
That's correct. That's why I wanted to raise that issue with you, to make sure that you're considering the criteria and what applies for removal versus on what may happen in the future.
So in a sense, what we have to confine ourselves is to the topic of not these purported ideas that have been essentially depicted tonight. Okay, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And we have to look at this as essentially the plat as it is currently platted right now. Is that not correct?
That's right.
Okay, because the future possibilities of how this would be replatted or going through a major or a minor development process is entirely separate from this hearing.
That's right.
Okay.
And if it stays in the district, it would have to go through this material change of appearance certification process and comply with the design guidelines. If it doesn't stay in the district, it won't have to do that.
Okay. Thank you very much for that clarification. Council, does anybody have any question? I realize seems to be sort of kind of legally nuanced, but I think the attorney is correct that we have heard an awful lot of stuff tonight, okay, that is somewhat tangential that could possibly not happen, okay? Correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, ultimately, I'm not saying I'm not intending to do it. It's just that your decision is based on the criteria in the code, which does not include future proposals for the property.
Thank you very much.
Is the public hearing closed? Okay.
Yeah, we actually, it hasn't been officially closed yet. I stepped in there before you closed.
Okay,
So,
all
and
right.
as a note, you can always.
Can we tell me procedurally, do you want the public hearing closed at this point?
So assuming there's no more questions for staff or for the applicant, you can close the public hearing, and then you can always discuss this with me for legal advice still.
Okay, all right. I'll close the public hearing, but I will reserve the right to reopen it if somebody has to jump up and has some testimony as a result of the illumination of the city attorney or discussion. Thank you. Council, your discussion. Nancy.
Thank you. First of all, to the applicant, I really appreciate and believe your intent of what you're trying to do, and I think preservation is certainly an act of passion and love, and usually not of dollars and cents. And I also appreciate it because that you are in my ward, and I walk by it and through it quite frequently. And over the past year, to have seen when the tree cutters first came in, I was terrified. And, you know, it does appear that what you're taking out was just dead, reasonable things. So I very much appreciate that and all the work that you've been doing on there. That being said, to my fellow counselors, it just seems like the original intent or the original designation was for the entire site. And when you say, you know, the original criteria was the majority of the buildings met the criteria, and they did. Well, when you split off just a piece of it, well, then it's easy to say it no longer meets the intent. It would be like, you know, a vacant lot in the historic downtown district, and I want to remove that vacant lot from the historic district and put up potentially whatever I want. I might comply with historic guidelines, I might not, but it's out of the district now, so I can do anything I want. So it just doesn't make sense to me. And you know, we are a historic city. Our citizens, as noted, over and over again, have shown how much they value the history of our community. And so I am very, and there's a lot of gray areas here. It's very difficult to separate, in this particular case, the buildings from the site. So I just want to put that out there. It is difficult to do. But I just, and also the criteria that are being used are very gray and very, in my opinion, subjective. So if I'm falling on the side of not approving the request.
Councilwoman Chandler.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to comment that I am just thrilled to see this room full of people. Regardless of what side you're on this issue, I love to see democracy in action and our citizens showing up and being heard. So I see less gray area with this issue. I often sit in this chair and wonder, you know, what is my task in this situation? And I think citizen Richard Bainbridge put it well. What are we tasked with tonight? And sometimes I have to think about what I'm not tasked with. I'm not tasked with doubting whether the developers have great intentions or whether you're wonderful people or how long you've lived here. That's not my task. My task is to decide whether this property meets the criteria for removing it from the historic district. And I'm going to refer to City Planner Dylan Becker, Planner 2's slide presentation, slide 8 of 12, where it's clearly spells out the 6 criteria under section 17.04.040B, number 4. The area in general is associated with a historically significant period in the development of the community. And I have walked this property. I have taken my dog over and sat in my car and looked at traffic patterns for hours on end. And I really feel that this area in general is associated with a larger historic package that is this property. So the other task that I'm tasked with isn't sitting here and wondering what previous councils had to go through when they were deciding what to develop in that area. Our task is what's in front of us today. And, we're talking about the potential of reducing that historic area to only 3.29 acres. And I believe that it is not in our best interests. It is not what I'm hearing the community that we are elected to represent is telling us what they want and need. And while I appreciate the people that have shown up, we've also gotten emails and other correspondence from citizens weighing in with their opinion. So I will be voting to retain this area in the historic district.
Council?
I'll be voting to deny the application for all the reasons that have been said.
Any other comments? Please.
So again, I'm still new to this process. So what are the next steps after this? Like, when will this come before council again?
This is the only time before council as far as whether or not it should be removed from the Historic Preservation District.
I guess just in terms of the overall application process.
Well, ultimately, I'm not sure what other applications they would plan to file if this was denied. It would depend on what they do. It really depends on what they're going to propose to do after this.
Mr. Parker, as a matter of procedure, since the item is titled a consideration, is this merely a topic for us to discuss, or do we actually do actual business with it with item I-1?
Yeah, we've had this discussion previously,
yes.
And you can do it either way. I generally think it's probably best that you actually just finish your conversations, do a motion, vote here, and then how you vote here will depend upon how you handle your item I-1.
Okay, all right. So basically, we would be in item H1, we would be moving to either uphold the HPC decision or overrule it.
Yeah, you're actually, it's just a recommendation by the HPC, yes. So you're actually making your own decision.
We're making our own decision.
Or to reject the application.
Yes, thank you. All right. Okay, we would either adopt their findings or we would find our own, correct?
Yeah, I think that the way I would frame it is that you would either approve the application or reject the application.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I had previously said that because I thought this, hang on here, Michelle, I'll get to you as well. I had previously said that, and I think there was a very important distinction that the city attorney enumerated here about what's before us here tonight. And that's why I said I would reserve the right to reopen up the public hearing if, in listening to the city attorney's advice about where we stood on this, if you had any additional comments as a result of that illumination. Okay? Is there anybody who would like to have that opportunity? Then I will reopen the public hearing. Please come forward and just state your name for the record.
Nancy Johnson, and we're one of the partners. So this has been a long process. This has been a very upsetting process to not have the support of, and as a Manitou resident, I cannot tell you the disappointment I have that we have not gotten support or encouragement from Manitou and from its citizens to come in and take a neglected piece of property and do everything we can to renovate it and make it good. Another person could have bought this property, another developer, and gone through and, done whatever they wanted. This has been a time-consuming, expensive project for us. We have met every criteria. Your experts have okayed it and recommended you pass it. Your staff has recommended. We have gone through over a year in this process. We have continued to pay mortgages and insurance and taxes and contractors. And you have made decisions on your own personal instead of what is the correct, legal. We've passed, we've dotted every I, we've crossed every T. I cannot tell you how frustrating it is as a Manitou citizen to see this process. And frankly, I don't know about the rest of my partners, but it has definitely tainted how I feel about the entire project and how we want to go ahead and make this something great for Manitou. I'm sorry. This is very upsetting. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, I'll close the public hearing again.
I'd
Mr.
like to make a
Parker, it seems
motion.
like, hold on just a second, Mr. Parker. You seem to be
No, I'm
pregnant
fine.
with
I
a
just know you
comment here.
you have a hand up.
Yes, I know. I'll get to her, but I saw your microphone on, so
I just didn't turn it off.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Michelle, please.
Could we please take a 3-minute break before we vote?
Certainly. I'll declare a 3-minute break, and then we'll resume in 3 minutes.
My microphone, there it's working. During the break, it's not to be discussed among city council members.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for that guidance. Thank you. Thank you. For the record, we're back on item H1, hearings consideration of this item HD 2101. Council, is there any other comments before I make my comment? I guess I want to kind of be clear to everybody in the room here. Given the counsel we've had from our city attorney, I'm somewhat troubled by some of the depictions we have in the packet, okay, that show lots and streets and things like that. And I guess, Mr. Parker, would you please also jump in and curtail my comments if I go off the rails here?
Well, I can make one quick one to start out. Maybe that'll help with this conversation. Is that ultimately it's not the city's decision what an applicant can submit. It's not the city's decision what the public can say. Ultimately, you just need to make sure that you're considering the relevant documents, the relevant comments with respect to the criteria in the code.
I understand that. I guess what I want to clarify, though, is in some of these depictions and some of these drawings and whatnot, these things are showing lots and streets and things that are much further down the pike, okay? And we are basically, what we have before us here is really changing the boundary on this one plat. Is that correct, Mr. Parker?
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you. So I want to be careful because I agree with Mr. Parker that people can say anything they want, but I do want to make sure that we are very careful about what is properly before us, okay? And it isn't some of these things that I think have been depicted, and I realize that people can say anything they want in our meetings in the public hearing. I'm not disputing that in the least bit. I want to just make sure that we're clear as to what's before us tonight. Okay? Thank you. Ms. Wolf.
I'd like to explain that the reason I'm disinclined to vote in favor of this application is that, and what was missed, I think, by the staff report and by the professionals that were retained, is not so much a focus on, gee, there are no historic buildings there, so what's the point? But rather the sentence that Judith Chandler pointed out from the packet, from our ordinance, which clearly says that we're also supposed to consider the entire area and the aesthetic of the area and the impact of that, and not just of the buildings, but the whole area. And I think that it's clear that the neighborhood and, in my opinion, is also the fact that the aesthetic would be reduced and damaged if we were to reduce the size of this historic district. You know, other comments that have been made, once it's gone, whether it's a dangerous precedent, all these other things. But as a finding of fact, I believe that it's perfectly legal for us to conclude that this property still meets the designation criteria that was established when it was made a historic district in the first place. I've heard nothing compelling to change that, and that is the reasoning for my position. Thank you.
Councilor Wolf, would you like to make a motion?
I'd like to move that we deny the application HD 2101.
I'll second.
Is there discussion on that motion? Mr. Parker, is that motion properly before us?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Any other discussion by council? Then I'd ask the city clerk to illuminate the voting system, please. Thank you. Please vote.
Oh, wait, are we voting in favor of my motion?
Yes, we're voting
We're
in
not
favor of
voting
your
in
motion.
favor of the application.
That's right.
Am I clear so I know
right.
which button to push?
Exactly right.
Okay.
So, yes, be very clear about that.
So yes means no. Yes means you deny the application, because that's my motion. I'm moving to deny the application. If you agree with me, you're supposed to push the green button. If you disagree, you push the red button.
Thank you for the advertisement there, Ms. Wolf. Okay.
Thank you.
Please vote.
So we have a 6-0 vote to approve the motion, which was to deny the application.
Thank you very much. We'll just take like a 1-minute break here so that if people would like to clear the room, so before we move on to item I1, I believe, according to the city attorney's guidance, that essentially our previous vote essentially makes I1 essentially moot. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. And I believe that also makes I2 moot. Thank you. Oh, we still have to do I2? Oh, I'm sorry. No, that's incorrect. So I misspoke. I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Nancy. At item I2, which is the first reading of ordinance number 0522.
Yeah.
I would accept a motion from the floor for first reading. Is there a second?
I have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Miss.
No, it's okay. They can second.
No, please.
Just to clarify, so we're removing the requirement. We can still request a work session if necessary in the future. We're just removing the requirement of one. Is that correct?
In terms of you're discussing about, in terms of what we're talking about, in terms of I2, right?
Sorry, I was trying to be relevant.
Yeah.
Why don't we get a second first so we can have a discussion?
Yeah, let's get it properly before us. There's Ms. Wolf made the motion to, and then the second?
Second.
Yeah, okay, second. Thank you very much. So now we can have some discussion about, would you like to ask the city attorney the question then?
Yes, please. Mr. Parker, if this is just removing the requirement of having a work session, not eliminating all opportunity for one.
Well, it actually does, because ultimately the reason why we're getting rid of the requirement of a work session is because it's really inconsistent with the concept of a quasi-judicial hearing for a quasi-judicial matter, and basically designation of historic districts or removal of historic districts is quasi-judicial, and so it should only be discussed in a public hearing, proper notice, et cetera, and that's why you don't have a work session.
I have a question for the city attorney, if I might. I remember, Jeff, that Nancy Fortune had mentioned how wonderful it is for her, and I think for all of us, to get materials well in advance of a hearing because there's so much to read. Am I correct in assuming that if this passes on first reading, there's nothing that would prohibit council from requiring that all materials that will be presented be given to, at the hearing, be given to us, whatever it is, 60 days in advance, 6 days in advance, or whatever. There's nothing in here that would preclude us from doing that. Am I correct?
Yeah, no, that's correct.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Any other questions or discussion on this item? This isn't a public hearing. This is just a procedural thing, a discussion to see whether there's interest on the part of the council in consultation with the city attorney and staff as to whether we want to move forward with this. Any other discussion on that item? Council, are we ready to vote? Then would the clerk please start the voting process?
So do we have a motion on the floor?
Yes, we have a motion to...
Okay, got it. Okay.
Yes, exactly. Please vote to move this on to second reading.
Mine's not working.
Or not, as the case may be. I'm sorry.
Six to 0 in favor of approving.
Okay. For clarification purposes, I believe this means this item will come before us as an agenda item on April 5th. Is that correct, staff?
Yep.
Thank you very much. So just as a matter of notice to the public, if you'd like to come and speak to us about this, that will be before us as a public hearing on April 5th. Thank you. The next item of business is item I3, which is for the council to consider the recommendation of the match board's recommendations for the 2022 grant awards.
I would like to recuse myself from this discussion.
For the record, Councilor Johnson will be removing herself from the dais. And what has arrived before us here, please state your name and address for the record. Thank you.
Okay. Neil Lynch, 151 Clarksey Road, Manitou Springs.
Rebecca Davis, I'm the finance director.
So shall we hear kind of a quick synopsis of what you would like approval or your recommendations for council?
I think Rebecca's memo.
So I've provided attachments to the memo that provide the recommendations for the Tier 1, which is a total of $323,154. And then for Tier 2, which includes the mini grants, it's $156,984.
Councilor, any questions on this? Nancy, please. Please.
I move we approve the match board's recommendations for the 2022 grant awards as shown in the packet.
I'll second.
I have a friendly amendment I'd like to offer, if I may.
Sure enough.
I would like to approve, subject to the elimination of number 3 contained on Tier 1 recommendations, which reads, the board is recommending a minimum of $45,000 annually for the remainder of the match term building to support funding plan as presented to the board. The reason I'd like to consider removal of number 3 is I really have problems with aspirational language, that, which is just a recommendation, but I don't think it's appropriate for us to take a position and to bind or to even attempt to bind or influence future councils on this, because we don't know what the facts will be. We don't know what the budget will be. There's a lot we don't know. So if we could eliminate number 3 under Tier 1 recommendations, I would like to know if that would be considered by moving parties.
We did change the wording a bit, saying the board is suggesting.
Yeah, that's what I'd like to eliminate.
Okay.
I support the removal of number 3.
Does the maker of the motion take that as a friendly amendment or not?
Oh, here. As you know, I'm supportive of aspirational language. I would prefer not to, but if that's the only way we get this through, we'll go along with it.
I guess I'd like to know whether you accept that or not.
I understand.
Please.
Okay, I will accept the friendly amendment.
Okay, thank you very much. I just wanted to be clear about what your motion is.
No, I get it.
So that the clerk knows
I'm not happy about it, but I'll do it.
Okay, so as I understand the motion is, Nancy, could you just recap it for the clarity of?
Sure. I move that we approve the match board's recommendations for the 2022 grant awards in accordance with the packet, with the exception of eliminating note 3 on the tier 1 recommendation slide.
Okay, is the seconder in concurrence of that?
I concur.
Thank you. Any other discussion on this item? Yes, Mr. Mitch.
Yeah, I'm perfectly okay with that. Yeah, by the way, I just think I'm going to be asking the council if there's a point in time, maybe at the end of this year, where you need some kind of commitment from the match board in support of financing. That's all. So if you don't need it, we won't bring it up again.
I'd like to call the question. I don't think that's pertinent to what we're deciding.
Okay, no, that's fine.
Okay. All right, that's fair. I think the question's been called then. Council, would the clerk please illuminate the voting system? I'm not used to the thing where there's a switch that says please vote. So the plus sign is to approve the motion. The red button is to disapprove. Please vote.
So we have a 5-0 vote in favor.
Thank you very much. Would somebody recall Councilor Johnson back in? Thank you, Leslie. For the record, Councilwoman Johnson is back on the dais. The next item before us is item I-4, progressive parking and incentives. Okay. And I guess to get this properly before us, I need a motion to approve and a second.
Sorry?
The progressive parking and incentives, okay, or discussion of it. We just need to get it on the table.
You need a motion to discuss?
Yeah, please.
Oh.
Yeah, I believe we do. Do we not?
I'll do it.
Or
I thought we already approved the agenda, so that means we just go down the list.
So is this just a discussion item and then we can make a motion? How should we handle this, Mr. Parker?
Can you key up, please?
Mike.
Mr. Parker, the microphone. Sorry, start again.
I was so good all day today.
I know, you were.
Yeah, no, so this is just a discussion item.
Okay.
So you don't have to make a motion or a second.
Okay, all right. So the matter before us, thank you very much for the clarification, is just a discussion item of item I-4, which is progressive parking and incentives. And Mr. Parker, I just want clarification here. Thank you.
Yep.
So given the way this item is on the agenda, is there any action that we can take on this or not?
It's for directing staff only.
Okay, thank you very much. All right.
Am I missing something on the agenda, Roy?
There's a resolution.
But no, but that's not up in front of the council tonight, is it, the resolution?
I didn't think so. I thought we were just going to discuss from last week, clarify, and then see if we move forward in bringing it next time.
So,
Okay. So it's a matter of discussion and possible staff guidance. Is that right, Mr. Parker?
There's a resolution attached. So if you guys choose to approve that resolution, you can. There is a resolution attached. We put that on there because we brought it to council last week for conversation and for direction, or you can say that you just want to have more discussion and deny the resolution and ask us to come back. But there is a resolution for your packet.
Okay. I guess I don't want to be nitpicky, but I just want to make sure that, do we have to properly notice resolutions or not, Mr. Parker?
So I thought this was on the agenda for discussion only. I
Okay.
wasn't aware of it, but ultimately, your agenda does say that you can take action on any item on the agenda.
Okay.
And so, I mean, usually when you have a resolution, you actually put a notice, there's a resolution for consideration on the agenda. And
Okay.
but you could take action if you wanted to, but that's not your typical way of agendizing resolutions.
Okay.
So that's why I thought it was just for discussion, but that was my understanding.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification. Okay, Council, so maybe we ought to start with just kind of a recap by the Deputy City Administrator. Roy, please.
Yes, so good evening, Council. Roy Cheney, Deputy City Administrator. Last week we discussed some parking initiatives to improve our congestion issues in Manitou Springs. As you recall, some of you recall that over 2 years ago I was given the TMMP, the Transportation Mobility Master Plan. In that plan discussed rates as part of the traffic control measures, and along with the MAP board, who 6-0 approved that we move forward on the items of last week, we decided to try to move forward on those items. But we had some questions, and tonight it's just to go over those questions. I did talk to Leslie Lewis today from the Chamber, who I believe wants to make a comment tonight. And then we also may have Carl Stang still here, and maybe Rolf Jacobson from the MAP board, who may also want to make some comments. So on the first item, it was about guaranteeing residents who are unable to park on street because of paid parking, not part of the RPP, have a place where they can pay to park in a lot that is their spot. I'd like to see reserved parking lots for residents who don't have a garage or on-street RPP arrangement, or even just adequate on-street parking. Our answer to that is, so we did look at Manitou Avenue. I believe Ms. Wolf brought up the parking challenges there already on the MAPS area on the west end of town. So we did look at that north side, I believe it is, and agree that it's challenging there if we have paid parking. So the idea is to consider that for RPP or resident parking as well, so we can keep that area open as much as possible. We are looking at other opportunities in the area that maybe we can also apply, but don't have any information on that yet, as we just started talking to some businesses in the area. It is something to note that homes on that side of the street do have lots. A lot of them have parking lots, so many of them are actually okay with their parking space. It will be those who struggle probably on the other side of the street that may need additional parking. And it might help with some relief on Waltham, which is a tight street anyway. Can you go back, please? Researching, we are also researching other parking areas. I guess I did say that already. And then we are looking at, even though it's preliminary, is some cities have decided to allow some overnight parking on Manitou Avenue, as long as we have proper snow route restriction posted, because it is important that vehicles move if we have a snowstorm coming in, so that the main arteries can be plowed as needed. So a lot of cities are starting to look at that as an answer for at least some overnight parking to help in those business districts that have also residents.
Mr. Cheney, can we stop there for a second? Can you tell me okay, it's starting to snow at night. Help me with a use case here. It's starting to snow. People have come home. They park their car down there. What is this purported snow route restriction? What does this look like? What does this mean to the people who have parked there? Does this mean that at 10 o'clock at night, they're having to go move their car when it's already snowing? Tell me, what's going on with that answer?
Yeah, so there's different cities have a little different measures depending on their snowfall, but basically the snow route information would be like, and then we're still looking at it, of course, but they would have the requirement to pay attention to the snow prediction for the street and make sure that they clear. If there's a prediction of snow, we would also communicate that out in our systems in the city. For example, there's a snowstorm predicted for tomorrow night and Thursday. We would put out information, there's a snowstorm, and then the parking, they would have to move their vehicles at a certain time when the snow starts falling, or maybe at 3 a.m. Again, this is preliminary. We're not to a point where we want to do it yet, and I would bring it back to council with more details. But if they don't move it, it is pretty strict that they might get snowed in or plowed in, or their vehicle may be towed if we need to clear it. So there's pretty tough restrictions, but the ability to maybe park there 90% of the time at night might be worth it for a 10% where they have to get up at 3 a.m. and move their car. So it might be worth it, and some cities are finding that that's the case. And it depends on the snow year. This year we had very few snow storms, so they probably wouldn't be bothered too much. But
so for clarification purposes, can we go back to that last slide, please? So consider overnight parking on Manitou Avenue. That's in the areas that is not in the RPP zone on Manitou Avenue, correct?
Correct.
This would be normal metered parking is what you're talking about.
Yes,
just
sir.
to clarify this.
That's correct.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay, next slide. The next comment, instead of referring to 2 zones, Bar Trail lot as a zone 3, yes, we'll do that. That's easy and makes sense that we keep the zones listed. It would also allow us to do for texting purposes on the paper texting program to simplify those numbers as well. And then I see there's another question on here, probably not answered. Echoing another counselor really wanted to make this fair to residents as well as tourists and businesses. I'm not sure what that question was, but when we looked at this program, we really did try to look at all the different groups. So we looked at the residents, and that's where the 50 credits came from, to give them free parking to use as they would like. We looked at the businesses and a pass card system for customers that are consistently coming in, that they can give them a discount on the parking rate. And we also looked at where we can try to get employees to park. We do have still some work to do in that area, and currently I'm looking at some space for them to try to remedy some of that problem of employees and such. So, all right. Next question. Will the price increases be reflected in the T2 mobile pay for 1 and 2 hour options? Yes, it will. It'll all be into the support will be sent to them and taken care of in the system. The parker does not want to pay the extra costs. Will automatically renew for them. It does not. They will have to make that decision. But if they have paid the texting program, it will text them that they're getting close to expiring, and they can pay from their phones and extend that. And since we would be reducing the zones, it won't matter what zone they're in, because zone 1 would be downtown, so they can do it from their phone or any nearby kiosk and not have to pay a different price. It would still be the price that's posted for that zone. All right, next question, will more staff be required to keep track of new registrations and license? The answer is no. With our current information through the T2 platform that council approved, it really has made it easier for staff to take care of everything electronically, and so that will not be an issue. So we appreciate that approval that we had. So next. Again, this is just the...
Mayor Pro Tem, can I ask a question?
Yes, please, jump in.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. I know that this is on slide 8 and it's coming, but it was one of the questions that came up, and it was regarding the 50 free credits. And I didn't get clarity in your slide presentation for tonight whether the 50 free credits was per resident, because on your slide you have per resident on slide 8, that you were thinking about per household per year. And then we weren't sure, we didn't have consensus on what a credit was. What is it in an hour And how, and was that for a calendar year? So I'm okay if you address it later, but that was a question that I
No,
had
probably be
posed
good
last
I
week.
address it now, and I apologize for missing that question. It's a good question. So the idea was per household, so a resident household, 50 credits for that household per year. So it is annual, expires at the end of the year. So 50 credits equal 50 hours. So again, the idea, because parking's difficult. After 2.5 years, I know that. And there's a lot of emotion tied up in there. It's tough, business struggling, residents trying to find space. And we really tried to find balance and then a way to make sure it's managed. To help with that management, we can't wait 8 years or 10 years to talk about an increase or decrease in pricing. So a recommendation, again, Donald Shoup is basically the expert in the world in parking. Every single study, every single book I read, which was about 6 on parking and mobility, walkability, cities, everyone says see Donald Shoup for the parking answer. When I reached out to a local expert, interstate parking, Gareth Lloyd, who has 25 plus years experience, he runs 75 cities in Colorado and towns, and again, the idea is that you have to follow the expert to get some results.
He runs the cities? What do you mean?
Interstate Parking runs city parking in 75 cities and towns in Colorado. They're also part of a bigger national program through Canada and in North America. So when we went to him to find out over 2 years, trying to figure out this parking situation and what do we do in Manitou, the answers came back to being the same again and again. And the one thing that is helpful in agreeing about Donald Shoup is the fact that occupancy levels gives us the numbers we need to decide on the price. The supply and demand, it's like anything else. And as a business owner, they know that if they have a sweater for 10 sweaters and they have 50 people that want them, that price will probably go up. And it's just what happens. And if it goes too high, of course, we may only get one shopper to buy a sweater. So they have to also work that in. And there's no difference in the control of parking in the city. And everybody has a right as the public to use a parking space. And if we don't price it right and someone uses it for 6 hours, it doesn't give an opportunity to others. So with this pricing structure and the price change, we can take a look at that on a quarterly basis. Even though, Ms. Wolf, I think you brought up the summer, and after thinking about it and talking to Kevin, who, by the way, is only out tonight because of he'd be working 13 hours so far, so we figured only one of us needs to work past that today. So I gave him off tonight. But we looked at that, and it made sense probably this first summer to probably every 30 days kind of look where occupancy sets, and maybe there has to be tweaks for a first month or two to the current rates. I will tell you, though, the current rates are based on a little bit of the modeling of Idaho Springs. They had a lot of success. A lot of businesses were nervous about it, but now are very happy with the structure. Because one of the big things is getting enough turnover per day. And when you have 2 customers per day, because 2 cars are going to take over those parking spots for hours, versus 7 customers per day, businesses will thrive on this, and there's been evidence of that, whether it's through the Donald Shoup books or whether the local experts in Colorado and elsewhere. So this is going to help us try to find that turnover rate that's important. So if occupancy is less than 85%, we do look at, okay, maybe the price is too high and we need to drop it. If it's equal to 85 to 92%, we leave it where it's at, because that's the rate we want to hold our parking. We want to keep about, that 10% in there open at all times. So when someone drives through for cruising, they find a spot. And then if they're at the 92 to 94 range, there's a 25-cent increase per hour. And then if greater than 95, which I can tell you right now, just this past weekend, every lot was over 100%. And over 100% is because they're idling in the parking lot, begging for a parking space. And so the price is just too low and makes it easy for folks to hang out there. And that's causing the congestion, it's causing, and frankly, a poor user experience from whether it's visitors or residents coming into town. They can't find any parking. Okay, next. So these are the rates we're proposing and the hours. As you can see, the recommendation is really when you go into the third hour that the price jumps. And again, that's to encourage someone to decide if they want to stay, that's fine. But, you know, if it's a little too much or you're done shopping maybe or done hanging out there, maybe it's time to move on and open the spot for somebody else. As you stay even longer, it gets more expensive. So people have to make a decision. I know that if you give Leslie a chance from the chamber, I know she has asked me, and I told her I would bring this up, that, you know, could we look at 1 to 3 hours versus 1 to 2? I'm not necessarily opposed to looking at that as maybe a way, but I will say that from the experts, this has been the recommendation at this point. I will say that the 30-minute free to 15-minute free, Kevin and I, after looking at and talking to some business owners, we feel that keeping the 30-minute fee probably would be good right now, and then consider 15 maybe if it's needed. But that might give a little more time for unloading and unloading for people dropping by. So we would not want to do the 50-minute at this time, but just keep it at 30 minutes. All right. The parking program for the residents is 50 credits, which is basically 50 hours of parking annually per household. We are looking at possible discounts for seniors and veterans, but haven't determined that yet. It does expire at the end of the year, each year. And we would make it as simple as possible for residents to do that program through the LPR system. Okay, next. Business downtown parking, the 400 block of Manitou Avenue is currently what we're going to try to get the employees to park at, or Prospect parking lot. We did propose a $100 per permit for that, and I think my mic is starting to die, so we'll pause for a second. So I'm probably the first person to tell to back off the mic versus to get closer to the mic, so I will do that. The $100, we just need to help cover some of the costs to manage parking, and everything has a price. I don't know if $100 is where we want to be, but I will tell you again, the MAP board approved 100. We talked about 50, we talked about less or more, and they thought 100 was fair per year. And that's per employee, or if the business owner wants to pay for it as an incentive for employment, things like that other cities have done. On the continue with that, to try to help businesses out too with repeat customers, there will be a pass card system that will get them a rate. They would have to buy those ahead of time. They're non-refundable. And basically and it'll be limited to an hour, so they can come and do what they want, come in and out. For certain businesses that have repeat customers. So we're trying to give them some help with that as well. Center lane deliveries, basically talking with Jeff Jones, the Public Works Director, 25 feet from crosswalks is the requirement in downtown. And as you know, if you ever go downtown driving, you see the vehicles parking 5 feet from the crosswalks. It's definitely a safety issue. So we want to paint and make it red fire zone, 25 feet out from those, not on the stone, but just outside the stone perimeter. and then put signage there that are breakaway signs, movable signs that state it's a fire zone, so we can keep trucks and vehicles from parking too close to the crosswalks and causing a safety issue. Go ahead, next one. So what we're looking at is, again, with the 6-0 vote from the MAPS board to move forward, we want to see if council wants to have us move forward on progressive parking rates, including the 3 zones. Progressive parking automated fee increase decrease chart based on data, so we would have paid that data to see on occupancy levels. Resident downtown parking credit program, business employee parking program, business pass card program for repeat customers, center lane delivery fire zones, and breakaway signage program. And then we could give you periodic updates on progress, how it goes this summer. In the end, we have to try something. For years, nothing besides the implementation of paid parking, there hasn't been many changes to it. Last year, we tried to do a somewhat of a price increase just to try to get something done to see if things were going to be okay. And with Hiawatha being charged, and you know, people are still coming to town. There are still people coming in, and so people will pay. I think they will want to pay to use this beautiful city, you know, as part of their day trips on the weekends. We also have to find ways to help the residents, you know, and the business owners that are here. And so some things I'm still looking at and talking to folks is the, you know, different parking areas, possibly some satellite areas that we're still looking as well to try to get some before summer. So there's going to be more to this at some point, but that takes time with some conversations with some folks. So that's it for me tonight on this, and I guess I just need direction from council and possibly if you want to approve the resolution, but we do have a few folks maybe here that would like to say something.
Okay, Mr. Cheney, we'll relieve you of your duty for a moment here.
Can
Anybody
I ask him
else?
A question?
Oh, yes, please. Yes, before.
Is that okay?
Yes.
So, can you tell me what are the current rates so I can compare those to your proposed rates? For example, downtown, what is it per hour in Wichita and what in?
So I would have to pull up that
Hiawatha.
information. Yeah, but it's $2 an hour currently, like in the Cannon lot, and in certain parts of the core. I don't know, Denise, can you pull up that fee schedule? There's a lot of different fees right now, so I don't want to guess wrong. Okay. Oh, it might be on the fee schedule itself still. Okay, thank you.
It's right, I have it, or Mr. Parker pulled it up. Hiawatha is $1 an hour. Shmishki is $1.50 an hour, or $5 for 4 hours, or $10 a day. Wichita is $1.50 an hour, $5 for 4 hours, or $10 a day. On street is somewhere between 50 cents to $2 an hour, and the bar lot is $10 a day.
Oh, thank you. So does that mean that at most, the highest increase that you're proposing is 50 cents an hour with respect to the downtown zone?
50 cents from the chart, if we go up, you mean, or are you talking about currently? Can you go back to the recommended fees, if I can see them? Or if you can go back to actually the page of the recommendations on the PowerPoint. Those are bigger. There we go.
So where you're suggesting $2 an hour for the first 2 hours.
Yes. Yes.
You're saying, and currently we already have $2 an hour on Cannon?
At Cannon Lot, we're currently at $2 an hour, but we don't have the steep increase at hour 3.
Okay, so if you're telling me that Cannon is already full or more than full at $2 an hour, based on everything I've learned from you about Mr. Shoup, we shouldn't still start at $2 an hour. I mean, that's like what you taught me, right? If it's already so cheap that everyone's going to come there and you have too many people, why are you keeping it already where we have a problem?
Well, part of that could be sticker shock, I suppose, if we go too high, but
I thought the whole point here is to
Right.
reduce the number of cars that choose to go there.
Yes, ma'am.
So sticker shock is an irrelevant thing. Sticker shock is the wrong answer. Obviously, it's too low right now. I'm not suggesting it go to $20 an hour. That might be sticker shock, but it seems inconsistent with your philosophy to leave it at the rate where it's already causing problems. I'm sure there's an explanation. I just didn't know what it was.
Well, the hour 3 is when we want people to move. So granted, it may be, and it may not be quite full right away, because right now it's $2 an hour. So let's say at 11, maybe it's 90% and 95. I mean, we have data that we looked at, and I don't have that with me, but if it's at 90 or 95, we're okay. But the problem is, because it stays at that rate, then more people come and then it becomes at the 100%. So the idea is, as we go into hour 3 and 4, the rate jumps more than double, and that helps move cars out.
And it also helps cars decide to move their car and go somewhere else, so that they're going to have more traffic because now they want to go to a different parking lot, or they're going to find a different on-street parking because they don't want to pay $5 or $10 an hour. So they just need to go, a little somewhere else. And then we have more cars trolling. And I thought that's what you're trying to prevent.
Right. So I disagree with that. I believe that based on studies and with Donald Shoup and with experts, is that what happens is they finish their trip and they do move on. Now, will there be a few that cruise? You bet. I've learned a long time ago that if we can get about 90% people to do things, I mean, that's pretty good in this world, especially in the United States where we could do whatever we want, right? So it's hard to get 100%. But if we can get the majority who will probably say, I've been here 2 hours, I don't want to pay $5, I'm going to move on, we will only have really 2 zones. So the only place they could move is further out of town, which would be right past City Hall. So they would have to move out of town, and they have to drive out anyway, so that if they find a parking spot there and they park again, they'll walk back in or take the shuttle. I think that's highly unlikely, just because of the stats from Donald Shoup and everything. It doesn't happen that way. Will you have a few people? Sure. But most will go ahead, and they got convenient parking for a reason, and now they're going to go ahead and say, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and be done today and go home, and then someone else gets the spot. The idea is that because there's always 10% available, then there will always be a few spots available anyway. So people will find them as you go through town anyway. So they'll find them to get off the street. So that's really the key of this program. If we can keep and I'm just going to use 10% vacant. If we can keep 10% of the spots open at all times, and that's the goal, about every 10 spaces there'll be an open slot. Not perfect like that, but that's kind of the thought. People will be able to find a spot before they're driving around 3 times or 4 times or 5 times. They'll find it right away and then pull off and start shopping. Someone else will come off because they don't want to pay maybe the 3rd hour, 4th hour, the 4+ hours. They'll pull out and open a slot. So we're really just trying to get turnover. And all the evidence and the studies show that turnover will be produced up to 6 or 7 times. We'll allow open spots for other cars to get into those spots and off the street, because they're going to come to Manitou. They're going to come in here. And so if we can get them off the street quicker, that helps them from stop cruising. And right now they can't, so they keep going in circles and circles and circles. And so that's the philosophy, and has worked really well. So I hope that helps.
I'm sorry. Please go ahead.
Shell's first.
Roy, I just have a question regarding the progressive parking. Could you please give me a couple of pros to have the progressive parking?
Okay, so a pro would be to reduce cruising. one of the biggest problems, and for pollution and just the experience in Manitou. It's really a car-centric city. So it's, you know, when I read, the book on walkable cities, they talked about, and that includes mobility, like micro-mobility, like bicycles, and it's not a safe place to bring your kids to go ride in the middle of downtown like this weekend. I wouldn't bring my kids. It's just too many cars. And so a pro is that if we can get cars off the street quicker, since they're going to come and we can't stop that, then we will have less cars cruising in circles, which is one of the hazards. So that's a big pro. So there might be a couple pros there. You know, the user experience, and we talk about, you know, the incline, the reservation system there, which I'm not talking about parking reservations yet, but that's a person reservation system, but parking is controlled, where they park and things like that. That has helped, but we still need to do more, and that means we have to try to reduce the cruising problem, which to me, you know, we all talked about the environmental side, pollution. We got to get them off and parked and then doing their business, because the car is just a method to get there. The real experience is going to be, can you walk, can you use and shop, can you do the things that you want to do in Manitou Springs, and the car is just the means. So, but when you have people, you know, it always ends with a walk, even if on a bike, right? You have to get out and you're going to do something. So we have to try to make it friendly towards the pedestrian. And currently it's, you know, if anything, probably more friendly to vehicles and cars and motorized. And I know we're trying to head in a different direction. There are predictions that, you know, in 15, 20 years, you know, from the electric vehicles and from autonomous vehicles, there'll be a 30% reduction in cars on the street anyway. And autonomous vehicles will be called in, what they call TNC, which is transportation network companies, just like Uber. All those will expand, where you'll just call, you'll get an autonomous vehicle, it'll pick you up, drop you off, go away, and it doesn't have to idle or hang out in your city, or maybe there's a certain area they hang out way outside the city. So there's a lot of changes coming up, and it takes time, but the current method and the best method right now, and the only method, honestly, is through pricing and to help reduce traffic, help the experience better, decrease pollution, and at the end of the day, also help businesses. I know it's hard, you know, it's kind of counterintuitive to tell your shopper you have to go, kind of, you know, you have 2 or 3 hours and you can't stay, but the shopper comes in, does their business, and then a lot of times they're just going to hang out, and that hanging out is taking away parking space that others have a right to use too, and that's the challenge here. I don't know if I gave you enough pros, but. Okay.
Mayor Pro Tem. So this will be no surprise that I consider our town is car-centric, because our parking, mass transit, traffic patterns are tourist-centric. And what I really want to see in this town is that we have a better balance between what we offer to our residents and when we open our town to the tourism. And I'll be really honest, I will say this out loud on record, that I don't think any price change is going to really make a big difference in the high season until we get some actual data from the COG, which we have gotten zero. We have no idea what 2021 was like, and we don't have any projections for 2022. So that will need to be forthcoming to council at some point, so that we can take if we're not looking at the big picture, then we're just running in circles. That said, though, based on your presentation last week, the way I interpreted this was more of a progressive parking and incentive pilot program, because it hasn't been tried in Manitou before, and unless we do launch it, we're not going to retrieve the data to get to that 10% or whatever it is that is our goal. I'm not sure that is our goal. If we want, I'd like to have people come to Manitou and want to stay more for more than 3 hours and not feel penalized for staying longer. But I think we do have to start somewhere, and we do have to have, as Councillor Fortune says, it's really good to be data driven, and I think that we do need to collect some of that data, and I think this is one way to do that. So while I think there's so many moving parts, right? Like we don't have a mass transit that serves our residents and so on and so forth, and we're talk of an electric vehicle trolley down the road, but I'm willing to look at this and support it as a pilot program so that you can come back and say, this is what worked, this is what didn't work, this is what we learned, so we can move forward. That's what I'd like to see from this.
Thank you for that input. I would say that parking's going to be on a pilot program forever. So, what will work in the next 2 or 3 years may change. And no one knows for sure what that change is, but I will tell you that I've been impressed since the pandemic to see even Zoom meetings, how fast we adjusted to technology. I read an article recently about GPS and how they're going to start integrating that into parking, where the new cars will actually, a map will automatically pop up and say, hey, you have a free space right here, and you can save it, reserve it, and go there. There's a lot of technology that's coming down the pipeline. So to me, this is a pilot, and data could be brought back. We can see how it's going, with parking logics and a system for the on-street parking downtown. We just talked to a company today that will be able to give us good data for our on-street parking. We'll be able to see how it's working and adjust it. The only thing I can do, and I'm not a parking expert, even though for over 2 years now I've dreamed it and studied it, and nightmares too. But only thing we can do is follow experts that have used it and the studies that have proven effective, and that's what we're presenting here. And I know sometimes a lot of this is counterintuitive and doesn't, no different than a parking garage. When I get asked, Roy, but if you brought in 400 more parking spaces, you'd solve your problem. And actually I said, no, we're inviting 400 more cars. So there really is, it's hard to figure out. It's very difficult, but there's a lot of different areas we're looking at as well, like parking maximums versus parking minimums, which will be brought up in the code, because back in the day when there was plenty of land, parking minimums were great. Now that we're running out of space, do we really want more parking spaces? That's the whole garage theory of adding more parking spaces means more cars will say, hey, we have room, let's come on in. So cities are changing them. And so good examples recently on one of those things we were looking at in the city, that parking maximums would have been a good decision, but we don't have it in our code. So we're looking at many different aspects. This is just part of it. I don't disagree. The COG, the COG/incline is a challenge. We are looking at some options there. Can't really talk about them, but we're looking at some options there, and I believe next week or week after will be talked about. So we are trying to figure out that solution. But if at the end of the day, if we make space, if we have a few spots available, then people will be able to find them quicker and get off the street. And that's really the only thing we can do right now. And if we can show that happening or not, and maybe you're right. Maybe Manitou is one of those cities just where we're located that, and we could charge $50 an hour and we're still going to be packed. I don't know. It's too charming of a town. It's a struggle, right? People want to come here. But I do think if we follow the experts, that won't happen. At some point, there'll be a right price that says to people, well, this maybe, and I know that scares businesses because, again, we're trying to look at the holistic approach here. As a city, businesses are important, residents are important. our job is to try to find balance somehow, and that's been the struggle. But we're looking at every way possible to do that, and this is a big step in that direction, I think, to try it and bring back data to so council can also look at that and give us their input over the next few months. So.
Oh, may I? My comments are, I think that it'll take 15 years before we get to a reasonable price if we're going to consider 25-cent a year increase under the zones that you presented. That I think that's ridiculous. I think the starting price is way too low, and also, like, you know, I'd be willing to bet my retirement account that this starting price is not going to help us next summer at all. I mean, it's so predictable. Everything you've said, even if there's a third and fourth hour punishment where they charge you a little extra, I don't see that. So I'm not comfortable at all with where you're starting. I'm not comfortable with the lack of detail and lack of attention to guaranteed resident parking. I think anyone who has paid for a full year to reserve a spot in the lot because they have no on-street parking and no driveway and no garage, I want to see something that guarantees that those people have a place to park. I think it should be in a lot. I don't want to have someone move their car at 11 o'clock at night in the middle of a snowstorm and have no place to put it. That's ridiculous. That's not the way I would want to be treated as a resident if I didn't have a driveway. So those are my comments that I'm uncomfortable with, and I also have not heard anything about how much time is involved with your reviewing these metrics, you know, as proposed quarterly. I'm not sure I'm in favor of all those metrics at all, unless it just takes 10 minutes a quarter or something, but I haven't heard anything that convinces me that it would really help. You did say, Roy, last time that, oh, if we realized that our lots were still totally crammed full during the summer, that may not really inform us on what to do for the slower season coming forward, but it might inform us the following summer. And then the following summer, we're supposed to do a 25% increase. And you already said that who in their right mind is going to make a decision on a 25% increase? Nobody. I mean, come on. I just don't find that realistic. So those are my comments.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments for Roy? Nancy.
Thanks. I agree with Councilor Chandler in that I'm more than willing to do this as a pilot, and what Roy said, it's always a pilot in Manitou. It's attributed to Einstein. I don't know if it's true or not, but if you always do what you always did, you always get what you always got. So I'm very supportive of what the map and Roy has brought forward to start that change and, you know, be able to act more with more flexibility to you guys to change things as they come along. I don't have a clue what the right answer is, and so I am highly dependent upon the map and you and your office and the parking office to come in with recommendations. And, you know, it's like, for me, it's like diving off the high board. And I readily admit that, but it's so challenging. So I would just like to move forward and try this.
Thank you.
Anybody else? A question for Roy, please?
I have a motion. Do I have to wait until we?
Why don't we wait just a second here? I think what we ought to do is let Roy get some exercise and go back, and let's get some other voices up here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Leslie, are you headed up here? Who else would like to speak, just to give me an idea? Hands. Okay, good deal.
Leslie Lewis, Manitou Springs Chamber of Commerce, Visitors Bureau, and Office of Economic Development. And absolutely, I think going to 2 zones would be a benefit. Because right now, somebody comes in and they're asking where to park, and you explain to them that, well, if you park in this block, it's $1.50 an hour. If you park in this block, it's $2. But if you park in this block, it's only $1. It's complicated. So I like the idea of the 2 zones. I am going to advocate for that 3rd hour on the same price, because to me, if I'm going to come to Manitou, have lunch, and shop, I can't do that in 2 hours. I can do it in 3, and then I can make a choice whether I want to pay more to stay longer and hang out. If I go to the arcade, I can spend 2 hours there easy. And then do you skip lunch or do you skip shopping? So my request would be that we look at the first 3 hours at $2 and then go to the different increases. So, thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Next, please. Just come on up. Please, your name and address for the record.
Hello, my name is Sally Fitzgerald. I live at 143 Deer Path, and I've lived here for 44 years. And for 44 years, we've had congestion. And I remember it was congested before we had pay for parking. So now we just have more congestion. There's just too many people in our world. I work part-time in the Wichita lot. I don't know what the answers are to parking. I don't think anybody in this room does, including the gentleman you're reading about. I do think $1.50 is too cheap. When we hear 90% of our parking in the lot are tourists, they almost laugh when we say it's $1.50. Now, you have to remember when you're on vacation, we have disposable income. They would pay $5 an hour to park. Believe me, but I'm not asking for a $5 raise. I'm saying I think everywhere in town should be the same rate. It's very complicated when you say, I parked on the outskirts of town, my time ran out, and I can't renew it in town. I have to go back out of town to renew it. It is so complicated. The tiers are complicating to me. I'm not a detailed person, but I'm just thinking, can't we make this easier as far as the rates? I don't know about the hours. I don't know what the answers are, but I do hear people in the lot, and I don't see anybody coming in to ask the staff what can be helped. So I'm just saying I'm here because I'm concerned about parking. I dread this summer with more COG people coming and more COG cars. I don't want to take any more time, so I just want to say that I think a flat fee across the whole town might be a better solution instead of tiers. That's all. I didn't say anything.
Yeah.
Yes.
She has a question
Natalie?
for you.
Sally, I'm wondering, you talk to folks when they're parking and talking about what they're doing. Do you feel like people do multiple things? I mean, we talk about that difference between 2 hours and 3 hours.
Oh, yeah. And
do you
then
feel like you can do Manitou in 2 hours?
No. And majority of the people are going to the COG, even though they're not supposed to park in our lot, they do. And the incliners too. And after they put their money in the meter, I can't tell them to move their car. So it's really a complicated thing. What was your question, Natalie?
Just how long it takes to do Manitou.
Oh, days. You know that. Everybody knows that. I mean, if you have 2 hours, you do 2 hours, but really you need more time than that. Doesn't everybody agree with that much? Thank you. Any questions?
Somebody else, please.
My name is Kathy Sullivan. I'm the...
That's not your name.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, sorry.
John Shada. Anyway, I'm the current president of Manitou, Commonweal Artist Co-op. And when I looked at those price increases, I thought, really? It's cheaper to park in Aspen. Okay, the parking in Vail is not as expensive when they go to those rates. I understand what you're trying to do. I really am. I do understand that. My Colorado Spring friends do not come to Manitou anymore. they say, oh, Manitou, I don't go there anymore. And part of it is the problems that you are expressing. There's no place to park. And they feel that. And we realize that Manitou is a tourist place. Commonweal benefits greatly from the tourists that come to this town. I think the 3 hours is better than 2. The jump up to 5, I guess it's okay to experiment. I think that's what you're going to try and do. Try it out. The jump up to 10 just sounds like, who do you guys think you are? Really? $10 an hour? I saw that and I went, you don't want anybody to come to your town. But I think I guess on one level, I think it's worth a try. I think businesses, like you're saying, are we feel, I think at Commonweal, we feel like this is a counterproductive move. But you haven't done it before, so I guess, we can find out. I do like the idea of make it consistent across the whole town. Even Colorado Springs did that. They just said, okay, it's $2 an hour all day, every day, no matter where you park. So if you want to do something like that, I think that's a great idea. Just quit with the nickel and diming people. Just make it the same everywhere in town, and then that'll be another thing you'll find out. Does that make a difference? I don't know. Anyway.
I have a question for you. Can I ask you?
Yep.
So your friends in Colorado Springs who don't want to come here because they know that there's a huge chance there'll be no place to park, do you think they'd have a different opinion if they knew that they could just go online and make a reservation to park, and they knew they had a reserved spot, they'd already paid for it with their credit card when they signed up? Do you think that would encourage more people to come in?
It might, but I think it would then, that kind of a system, I think, would really discourage the people who are just happening to come into the town and they're going, look at that prime spot. And there's a big sign that says, oh, I'm sorry, it's reserved. I think if you want to have people really not like your town, that would be something that would happen. Because how much do you like it when you go to a restaurant and you look at 5 tables are all set up and they're all reserved for somebody else, and you're going, I'm not coming back here without a reservation. I guess all these things are a giant might work.
So if you know that you have a guaranteed spot in a parking lot and you've already paid your $4 or whatever it is, you think that would offend other people who think, oh, I see an open spot and they won't let me park there because it's reserved. Someone's supposed to get here in any minute now. Then that would just really discourage visitors.
Yeah, I do think it would. I think it would discourage your tourists who are just stopping in. I think it would help the people from Colorado Springs, but I think it would discourage people who are going, oh, I think I'd just like to show up in Manitou today and do something. Those people might not be so
But those people already don't come because there's no spot.
That's right. They don't. And so I'm thinking of this town called Clovelly in England, that there's no parking until you park up at the top of the town. I'm thinking, well, one of these days in Manitou, they're going to have a giant parking garage right outside of town, and there will be no cars in this town. Just like in other places of historical interest and stuff like that in other countries, they simply just don't let anybody park in there. They don't let anybody park. And we may have to someday do that, but I don't know how soon that might have to happen in Manitou. And I'll just throw this out so I guess what I'm saying is, give it a try. Try 3 hours instead of 2. And the $10 seems extreme. Make it the same all over the town. And then I know, just one little aside, my brother lives in Salem, Massachusetts. And he doesn't have a driveway, or he has a parking spot in a lot somewhere. And it snows there. And if your car's on the road, they will tow it, because that's just what happens. If it's going to snow at 3 o'clock in the morning, they will tow your car if it's not out of the way. So this does happen in towns, and it's a disturbing thing, and it's like, okay, but if your car is on the town, when they're going to plow that and the snowstorm comes at 12 midnight, your car better be off the road or it will be towed off the road. And you will pay the money and you have to have a lot, and you have to have some place to put it. And unfortunately here in Manitou, it's the constant problem of where the heck am I going to put that darn car? And I'm so sad for you. However, as a business person or a person who's kind of involved in a business, we want to encourage people to come, and hopefully your idea might help more people to come. We've done really well so far, but it's, okay, that's all.
Kathy?
Thank you, Kathy.
Kathy, if I can
Yes.
get your address for the record.
321, Commonwealth Artists Co-op is 102 Canyon Avenue in Manitou Springs. That's not my address, but that is the business address.
Okay, thank you, Kathy.
Sorry.
Next, please.
Good evening, Council. Carl Stang, MAP Board Member, 204 Crystal Park Road. The whole conversation this evening about extending to 3 hours and the $10 charge is very curious to me. There is a finite number of parking spaces in downtown Manitou, and so if you cars don't spend money, people spend money, and so having that turnover is really a pro for business and also pro for residents. I mean, right now, Roy was mentioning this last weekend, we were packed out. As a resident, if I want to go downtown, there's no parking spaces. And so having a progressive parking fee structure that has 10% open, or a target of 10% open spots would be a benefit for residents that have a need to do business. There would always be a spot of it available. I commend staff for taking a data-driven approach and trying to do a pilot. I mean, what we've been doing to date really hasn't worked, and so we need to try something different. I understand Julie's concerns about pricing, but we got to start somewhere, and reviewing that on a periodic basis and making adjustments, I think, is the right approach.
Any questions of Carl? Thank you, Carl.
Thank you.
Next, please.
Amanda Schatz, 106 Ruxton, Apartment B. I am also the manager and a member of Commonweal. And I do want to just say, I walk my dog every day around Manitou, and I do see the same cars going around. There are people who come here just to drag the streets. There is a guy in a brown truck, lowrider. I see him all the time. I also see a guy singing at the top of his lungs. I don't know. So I'm just saying, the parking is not the only issue with people congesting the streets, because for a fact, I have seen the same people in the same cars just driving around. I don't know if they want to see the cuteness of the town or what they're doing. Especially during the pandemic, there was a lot of people just constantly dragging around. But also, on a business standpoint, I think that if you do raise the price substantially, we will be having more issues with business parking. We have been having more issues behind the buildings, people taking our spots. So if you do decide to raise the prices, please consider helping the businesses to get those people who are taking our spots, to get them towed, at least. I'm just putting it out there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, please. Is that it? Okay, thank you. Well, council, what do you want to do? No, but just what do you want to do? More discussion or what? Michelle?
I would like to make a motion.
Sure enough.
I move that we adopt the following items from Roy's presentation. For on-street parking, summer rates will start the Friday before Memorial Day, which would be May 27th, 2022, through Labor Day, September 5th, 2022, and the rate would be $2 an hour. And the $2 an hour is from current times of 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Rates would change on September 6th, 2022, through October 31st, 2022, and that would be set to $1.50 an hour. Going into winter, starting on November 1st, 2022 through February 28th, 2023, the rates would be $1 an hour. Beginning spring, March 1st, 2023 through May 25th, 2023, the rates would change to $1.50 an hour. Rates for the parking lots would change as follows. Wichita, Canyon, Shmishni, and Hiawatha, flat rate, $2 an hour. Max that someone would pay for an entire day would be $15 for those 4 lots. There would be no special zones, and I propose we will keep the 30-minute free parking to allow residents, tourists, and businesses to efficiently get what they need from local businesses without having to stress about the fact that they may get a parking ticket after 15 minutes. And I also adopt that we do not have zones 1, 2, and 3.
Council, is there a second for that motion?
Can I ask a question about it, or do I have to?
Why don't you
Wait.
second it so we can at least discuss it?
I second it. The reason I'm uncomfortable about it is that I believe if we charge more for the cars who want to drive right into the center of town, and then we charge less for the cars that are willing to be in, say, the outer, like in Hiawatha at this time, I think that reduces the number of cars that actually go smack dab in the center of town. And that's why I like the idea of having 2 zones, so that you are cheaper if you're farther away from downtown and keep your car away from downtown. And if you insist on coming, smack dab in the center of town, then you should pay more. Is that something that you'd be interested in considering as a change, or I just wanted some discussion about that.
Michelle, would you clarify? I thought you did have something that was different between, let's say, Hiawatha and downtown. Did you not, in terms of as you went through that?
Hearing Sally speak, I understand what she's saying about the flat rate for the lots. And then as far as like the different zones, I understand that, but as a tourist, the last thing I'm going to be doing is researching parking. When I go to Boston or wherever, I know that rate is going to be higher than Pueblo, Colorado. And I don't even know if Pueblo has parking fees, but just hypothetically. So I don't think, for my thought process, as a tourist, all of a sudden, I just want to get to where I'm going. If I'm going to eat at the townhouse and it's a nice sunny day, sure, I don't mind parking past Chase Bank, kind of by Subway. That's fine. It's a beautiful day. But if it's wintertime and it's 7 degrees outside, I want to be in front of the townhouse, but I really don't want to think about parking. I mean, I feel that we're going to pay what we're going to pay, and I do apologize that I forgot your name, but just like Colorado Springs residents, yes, I do have friends that refuse to come into Manitou with our most recent increase last summer. And I wanted to say, well, it was only 25 cents or 50 cents or whatever it was. I'm still going to pay to do the incline or whatever, or just park at the trading post and add another couple miles to come into town. So that's why I say we stick with a flat rate and go seasonally.
Could I just, so your motion is for all the parking lots to have the same rate? Is that what your motion was?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I would say I'm intrigued by this idea, but I do feel like typically when I make these decisions, I like to work through our advisory boards because they spend so much time and energy. And then if we kind of flip on their work, then why do they meet? Like, what do they do? So I think that, to me, and where we are today, I feel like the next step would be to meet with the mobility and parking folks, not to supersede and change their recommendation.
Yeah, I had a similar concern. I had difficulty following your motion just because it seemed like it completely changed what the proposal was. So I don't know if you talked with staff about it at all prior to bringing it tonight. But so I think I'm feeling blindsided, and I'm sure staff does as well. So I think, you know, since we started out this discussion not really clear on what direction we were going in, perhaps we need to go back individually, or you might want to talk with the MAP and understand their position, or you could explain your position more to them, and same with staff. So I'm unprepared, which is why I think you didn't get us, well, you did get a second, but there was tremendous hesitancy for a second. Thanks.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Is there, yes, please.
So I've really looked at this a lot, and I want to say one thing. I drove to Denver yesterday. It was Monday. I left at 10 a.m. and I left Denver about 2 p.m. It was horrible. It was a horrible experience. The worst part of that whole trip was leaving Colorado Springs. There was more of a bottleneck at Cimarron and I-25 all the way to the Interquest Parkway. That was the worst part of the trip, coming and going. And so we have this reality that we're going to allow Colorado Springs to keep growing and growing and growing and growing until we run out of water or we burn, I don't know. That's just how it is. I mean, the development from Colorado Springs to Denver was just wall to wall development. So it's not gonna get better. And so my thoughts are, I actually like the zones, the 2 zones. I would like to at least pilot that just to see, because in my personal opinion, I want people to come to this town and I want them to have a great experience. But I don't want our town to be car-centric. I mean, I don't know what the solution is either. I do think that, Michelle, your rates are too low. From listening to Councilor Wolf, I mean, I'm certainly okay with making the change from 1 to 3 hours, the first 3 hours. But I also want to throw out the idea that maybe we need to raise the initial rate. I don't know, I think $2 an hour is really reasonable for any tourist town. But anyway, other than that, I would like to stay with the map recommendations with the zones, and with the exception of going to from 1 to 2 hours to 1 to 3 hours, I'd like to at least pilot these rates. Thanks.
Any other thoughts? Oh, please, Michelle.
I have an issue with the progressive rates. The only town in Colorado currently that is using the progressive rate is Aspen. The other cities are in California. Not even New York is using a progressive rate, nor any major cities in Florida like Miami, Tampa, Orlando. I just, listening to our residents, stating that it takes at least 3 hours to do anything. What if your kids are playing skee ball for 2 hours and they're hungry? That's another 2 hours because you have a half-hour wait at the keg. And then all of a sudden you're jumping from $3 an hour to $5 an hour, and yet they still have to tip, and the price of food has gone up, but yet they still want to eat here because they don't want to go to downtown Colorado Springs or Old Colorado City because they have parking issues too, as far as getting close to parking. And if you're downtown at the pizza place at Fat Sully's, they're looking at a 20-minute walk on a Saturday.
Nancy.
Thanks. I think my sense is that there's a basic tension here between wanting to reduce the number of people in town because it just adds to congestion, and then making everyone who comes to town as happy as they can be. And it's a natural tension. I also know that there is absolutely no silver bullet for this. And our TMMP pointed out, gave us a very systemic approach. And so this is only one aspect. Parking is only one aspect of many components of that TMMP. So I'd just like to reiterate that I am supportive of the work that has already been done on this. I could go with very minor modifications. If we go to 2 to 3 hours, I'd be okay with that. But if, it's basic economics, it's supply demand. And I just always think of parking like that. And if the supply is low, prices go down. It's supply. Thank you. Anyway, so you get my argument here. Yeah, thank you.
I have a question, if I
Yes,
may.
please.
I want to know if my fellow council members would consider, if we are going to have a flat rate that applies for the first 3 hours as opposed to the first 2 hours, and it sounds like there's at least some support for that, I would propose that that be something we consider if we raise the rate. $2 an hour is ridiculous. I mean, I'm sorry. If you live here and you have to pay $2 an hour because that's the only place to put your car until there's an opening in Wichita lot, then that should be free. But if you're coming into town, I don't think we have to worry that we'll have empty parking lots next summer if we bump it to $4 an hour or $3 an hour. I mean, if I were wrong and we had all this open space and no one's coming because, I'm not going to pay that, we'd know it pretty quickly and we'd be able to make an adjustment. So I propose, I'm afraid that if we start with $2 an hour and then we're going, 25 cents a year, I'm going to be 95 before we get to Roy's sweet spot of having an open spot because of the whole supply and demand thing. We all know about supply and demand. And we know that there's a much bigger demand than supply. So why on earth would we keep it at $2 an hour? I don't get that. I wonder if there could be some compromise here of adding a third hour in exchange for increasing the hourly rate. I don't know if anyone else would be interested in asking staff to do that.
I support that. I support an increase to $3 or $2.50 to $3 an hour for the first 3 hours.
We have a motion on the floor at this point. Yes, we do. She made a motion, and we have a second for discussion purposes. So I guess, Michelle, as the maker of the motion, or maybe the seconder, if you, given this discussion, you want to make some modifications, okay? Or do you basically want to call the question and see how it goes?
I'm willing to make some modifications.
Okay, all right. What would those be? or maybe other council members can offer some friendly amendments, okay? Or maybe people don't like the entire package that you're coming up with. I don't know, but let's have a discussion on that.
Just FYI, she could rescind her motion and put out a new one also.
Yeah, that's a possibility too. Yeah, so you can totally modify your motion and see if there's still a second for it, given that you heard this discussion.
After this discussion, I will rescind for now, but know that I will be coming back, especially when we start talking about parking permits.
Okay, all right. So it sounds like the maker of the motion has pulled their proposition, and unless the seconder wants to pick that up and find another one, we will consider that dead at this point, okay? Is there any more discussion, or is there a motion that somebody wants to make on the floor?
I'd like to make a motion.
Certainly.
I move that $30 the rate for Wichita begin at $3.50 an hour for 3 hours, and go up $1 after that for the remainder of the day. And that that applies well to Cannon and Wichita. What's the one? Wichita. What's the one on the west end of Manitou? Smishne. Thank you. So for the three that are really right smack in town, and that we start at $2.50 an hour for Hiawatha, and that be the rate that we use for the summer, high season. I doubt we'll have any empty spots, because I think, but I'm just trying to work with what I got here, because people are afraid of it being too pricey. And that's as far as I'll go. I don't want to go into all the different seasons and all of that as part of the, just step one. That would be my proposal, my motion.
Okay, so.
When Roy has a question.
Yes, is there a second for that?
I'll second, because I have a question also.
Certainly, certainly. Yes, Roy.
I didn't hear on-street pricing.
I'm not going there yet. There's 20 different moving parts, so I just thought I would tackle a little bit at a time, because if you throw in all 20 things, it's impossible to get all 6 people to agree. So I just thought I would take it piecemeal, a la carte.
Okay, thank you.
All right, okay. All right, so let's try that, see if that works. All right. Okay. So is there any discussion on that motion?
I have a question. So Wichita, Canyon, Schmishney would be $3.50 for the first 3 hours, and then increasing by $1 an hour. Then you mentioned Hiawatha Gardens $2.50 an hour, but you didn't mention whether that would increase by $1 after on hour 4. And then when would these prices go into effect?
May I
Yes, please clarify.
Thank you. Yeah, I missed that, so I'm glad you noticed. Yes, so with the $1 an hour increase at Hiawatha starting after the 3rd hour as well. And remind me, if somebody here knows, what does the COG charge if their customers happen to use the restroom after their train ride and miss the 2-hour minimum? What does it go to at that point?
The COG charges $10 for 3 hours. Okay, $15 for 4.
So the 4th hour is $5. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Mm-hmm. The 4th hour is an additional $5. Yeah.
Thank you.
So it's my understanding that we want people to park in the lots as opposed to on the street. So for me, it's important that we do discuss the street pricing, because I believe that should be more than the lot pricing. So I just think we need to keep that in mind when we're having this conversation.
Would you like to make a friendly amendment to add to what I said with what you just said, and to be specific about how much more you think the on-street should be? That's fine.
I'm not, yeah.
Not really?
I'm not prepared.
This is so
I really would like to hear from the mobility and parking folks. This seems like a pretty dramatic change for me. So I'm comfortable with us making this recommendation to the MAP board and then having them come back. I do feel like there's a step. Oh, sorry, Roy. Sorry.
Nancy, next.
Yeah, thank you. I, to be blatantly, brutally honest, I am probably going to vote against just about anything at this point, because my brain is so fried. Brutal honesty, and I'm not comfortable making a decision of this complexity without more consideration of these proposals.
Okay, I will entertain a motion to postpone this item until a date certain.
I so move.
And what day would you like to postpone it to?
Anytime.
April 5th?
A month from now.
April 5th?
How about 4 weeks? You know what I think might be helpful, though, which is more like the olden days? If we could actually have a couple of tables in the middle of the room, like we used to do in chambers, and we all sit around in a circle, we're not all separated like this, and we actually can have a conversation with the match board, not just Roy and Kevin, and we're not limited to like talking 3 minutes each and all of that stuff. And we can actually discuss all of these concerns together before we go ahead and try to come up with some kind of a majority position.
Okay. Councilor Wolf, is that a motion? Is there a second?
You asked me a date. I don't have a date, but I want it to be at a work session.
We'll figure out the date. Is that a motion? Is there a second for that?
I move to do that at a work session.
I second that.
Okay.
And I have a date.
Okay. Okay. Well, it would probably have to be a work session time. Okay. So the next one that would be coming up, I see Denise pulling her hair out there a moment.
I'm looking at work sessions. April 12th is pretty packed already. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 agenda items for April 12th tentatively right now.
Ouch.
So then you would look at April 26th, which is the 4th Tuesday of the month, which we're trying not to have. We're trying to give those as a break. So
Let's go for that.
So I don't have anything on that at this time. Or we're looking at May 10th, but I do know you could schedule also a special work session as another option. I do know Roy would like to get this in place the 1st of May, just to start tracking how we're moving forward. So,
Ms. Howell, do we have anything scheduled for the 29th? I don't have that up on my computer.
No, we don't. We usually take the 5th off. The 5th Tuesday of every month has always been off, but we don't have that right now.
Well, I guess I'm just kind of, if there seems to be this urgency to try and get it in place by the summer, I'm just asking, should we, consider the 29th? And does the maker of the motion maybe want to consider that?
Thank you, that's helpful. So I rescind my motion. My new motion is that we discuss this at a work session on the 4th Tuesday of April, whatever, was it the 29th? Whatever that was.
Well, the 29th would be March, but you want to go clear into April?
No, whatever, I'm sorry, my brain is pretty fried too at this point.
Right.
What was the date that Denise was saying, we could do it then, but it's the 4th Tuesday? What was that date?
It'd be the 29th, correct?
The 29th of?
So March 29th is the 5th Tuesday, or April 26th is the 4th Tuesday. And and then you'd have to take it back for approval if you wait till April 26th. So then you're looking at not going into effect until May, the middle of May.
Well, thank you so much. Then I move that we put this on the 4th Tuesday of March for a work session. 5th.
It would be the 5th Tuesday, the 29th. Is
That's
there a second?
what I meant to say.
Is there a second for that?
I second.
Okay. So it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion to roll this over into essentially, it sounds like to me, a joint meeting with the parking board, okay, on the 29th? Is that correct? Yes. To clarify your motion? Yes, please.
I'm just wondering if it would make sense if we came to them. So their next meeting is the 23rd at 6 p.m. And I'm just wondering if it'd be easier. No, it's not easier? Okay, sorry, Roy disagrees. So
we are full that day already with the Hiawatha discussion. We have a full agenda. It's going to be probably a 2 or 3 hour meeting already.
Okay.
I do also want to remind council that the Metro or the Metro Board has to approve the Wichita lot and the Smithsonian lot. So regardless of what's decided, they have to approve as a board.
Okay. Right.
Thank you.
That's a good FYI. Thank you. Okay, so we have a motion on the table to roll this over to March 29th for a work session. As I understand it, we would invite the Parking and Transportation Board. Is there any more discussion on that? Nancy, please.
Yeah, I think it would be better to just recommend that it go there, and when the mayor gets back, let him see if there's an alternative date that makes more sense.
I think I'll call the question. Can we please vote on this? The clerk?
We all look at you. Come on, Judy.
I'm trying to move it along here as best we can. We have an executive session. Please vote.
Okay, so we have 5 voting yes, 1 voting no, and that would be
Okay.
Nancy Fortune voting no.
Okay, so it sounds like it's a consensus of council to have this on the 29th, and we invite to have a joint session with the Parking and Transportation Board, and we try and iron this thing out so we can get going for the summer, right? Okay, all right. Our next item here is to receive or act on council correspondence. Since the hour is getting late, I see lots of people drooping. I'm hoping people will keep these things short. We have an executive session coming up. Please, Nancy.
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of things. I appreciate what we've been getting a lot of social media play with leash law and dog waste, which has always been an issue, and I appreciate what the city did in putting some educational stuff out on that. And I also represented the mayor at the PPRTA meeting and PPACG meeting last week, and the recommendation had been that we reduce because of the addition of Calhan, that we reduce our members on the CAC from 2 members to 1 member. And we were able to retain both members, had really great support on the PPRTA board, so that was really great news.
Thank you, Nancy, for that report. Anybody else? Yes, please.
I would like to see something done about the excess amount of sand and gravel that's all around the entire circumference of Ruxton Roundabout, and then west on Manitou Avenue from that roundabout all the way to Park Ave, or where Tubby's is. There is so much gravel and sand. It's been there for well over a week. I'd like to see it cleaned up. That's all I have.
Thank you. Anybody else? Natalie? No, 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 no? Okay, let's move on to item K, please.
Is that us? I'll
Yeah,
just
that's
do
you.
real quick. I have 2 quick ones, and that's
Yes,
it.
please.
Tomorrow night is Hiawatha Zoom meeting, so at 6 to 8, so that's that. And then you should have received your magnets, and I will tell you this weekend I received numerous comments saying thank you for those magnets. So I want to recognize Alex for getting that done. That's it. So we can get on.
That's it with item K there. Mr. Cheney?
Just that we're addressing that sand, talked today to Public Works, so they'll get on that as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Okay, anything else on item K? Okay. City Clerk, please tell me how you want this to be transitioned into item L.
So typically, you would read that item.
Yes.
And then we need to have a motion and a second and a vote to go into executive session.
So the next item that is a proposal that we have an executive session for the consideration of documents protected by the mandatory non-disclosure provisions of the Open Records Act pursuant to Section 5.1 sub F of the Manitou Springs Home Rule Charter, specifically CRS 24-72-204 parentheses 1 parentheses A, whatever ETC SEQ, and by reference CRS 29-2106 subsection 4 C2 pertaining to the confidentiality of sales tax information relating to specific businesses in the city. Do I have a motion that we go into executive session?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Please vote. No discussion. Hold on.
Up to the vote.
Are you done voting? Please go ahead.
I just want to say I think Mr. Parker could go if that's okay with you, and we just need Roy and myself in this meeting along with
Okay, if
Becca.
that's your advice, then Mr. Parker, good luck. Drive safely. Thank you.
And we did have a 6-0 vote in favor of that.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I had a feeling that would go that way. All right, so we need to take what? Just a few minutes? 5 minutes? Okay, thank you very much. We'll take a 5-minute break and get everybody assembled. Maybe we'll get the heat turned on. I see lots of hands and jittering. So thank you very much.